The girls stood on the terrace and shouted excitedly. Their trepidation was associated with the marquise, whom they were supposed to see today. They admired her eyes like emeralds, her hair, and of course her sword skills. The conversations brought a blush to the young girl's cheeks. They continued to chirp about how the girl was not popular because she had such a magical aura. "I have never seen such an aura on any person," one of the girls shared. Everyone looked to the side at once. There was a girl with green eyes and hair the color of ripe wheat walking. This was the captain of the 2nd Night Battalion, Laurel Devil, the Marquise. The heroine was heading to the office of the captain of the 1st Battalion, opened the door and shouted to pay attention to her. Laurel was excited. She asked for time. Even if the man is too busy, the matter still requires a conversation. Waving her hands, she said that his people were starting a fight with her soldiers again, but she noticed that the captain did not hear. He was absorbed in papers at the table. Blue eyes, short black hair, strong chin. This is what the captain of the 1st Battalion, Edgar Farrell, looked like. The man looked up at Laurel. This was her 46th report on this. She was indignant because nothing had changed, and everyone was still hurting her youngest. The girl started talking about reputation as leaders, but Edgar had already put his finger to his head, reading her next report. Seeing this attitude of the man, the character could not stand it. She loomed over him. She would not be afraid of a reprimand. She would solve this problem herself. And slamming the door, she took her leave. The knock was quite loud. The guy remained sitting and just looked at her. He put his hand to his forehead. A bright blush appeared on the captain's cheeks. This was Laurel's story, as well as a love story for her enemy. The sparrow chirped cheerfully. On the lawn in the middle of the greenery, there was a table, and people, surrounded by servants, were drinking tea. The man and the young maiden praised a guy named Bell and called him the greatest wizard. The young man kept up the conversation while they were talking. The girl the guy was asking about came up to the table. They were happy at her arrival at the table. The smiling girl sitting at it pointed to a pile of letters and shared that these were all proposals for marriage. The man tried to find out if Laurel might have someone in mind, but as she sat down at the table, she shook her head. She needed to find someone. She knew about it, but the couple assured that there was no need to rush into it, a partner for life. They hugged each other. The woman and the man laughed tenderly, imagining how they would have children, what they could do with a boy and a girl, and what they would call them. Laurel took a cup of tea, brought it to her lips. She looked at her parents and smiled. It was sweet, although awkward. That night, the carriage overturned. Father and mother in each other's arms. Laurel was too self-confident. The funeral passed too quickly. The two stood near the fresh graves. The rain hid their tears, but the pain of loss was strong. Nothing could hide it. People were whispering, discussing that they would now lose their place on the council, since the son was a great magician. The guy looked around, his eyes flashed evilly, shouting curses with tears in his eyes. Belle wanted to rush into a fight, but Laurel stopped him. There would still be a lot of different conversations and gossip. He turned to his sister, promised that he would become the head. He would leave magic, but his girlfriend abruptly interrupted him. Laurel succumbed to him. They have a chance. She will become the head, and in no case should he be thrown away the opportunity because his parents were so proud. The men in the hall shouted over each other. They swore and argued that it was unacceptable to become a marquise's woman. It was better to transfer the title. Archduke Jan decided that other nations would look down on them. Because there was a woman on the council, this was impossible. The girl exclaimed that everything will work out. You just need to prove it. The law says about it. It's very simple. Leaning forward, Laurel loudly declared, placing her hand on her chest, that she would prove, like her father, with a sword, that she would become a knight. At the same table, I challenged Yang. The man darkened and was already clenching his fists in anticipation. The fair-haired young man, Prince Cain, laughed, covering his hand at the girl who was attracted to the Archduchess. He also offered to give the opportunity to conduct a duel. If he wins, then he will be in the council. The Archduke tried to be indignant. Ian was not left without his word. If he loses, he will marry the man chosen by the council, and looked carefully. He smiled, pleased with himself, because his plan was perfect. He had planned the next event, so now he was sitting too self-confident. When the king turned to the girl, she jumped up and bowed, thanking his highness. The sound of metal rang out. Blades clashed in battle. No one wanted to give in to each other, because too much was at stake. The man grinned. The young miss was able to surprise him. Not every nobleman can do this. He looked, and his blue eyes flashed. She bowed her face. This was not enough. She clenched her teeth. Sweat ran down the girl's face. She didn't want to give up. Suddenly, Laurel's sword broke off. She stared at it. Her eyes widened. Her mouth parted in surprise. The Archduke's grin became mocking. He was right when he said that the sword was just a decoration for her. Those around openly yawned, watching what was happening, and Ian continued to mock the girl, saying that the father would be ashamed of such a daughter. The king raised his hand, trying to stop the fight. Everyone saw that. Although Laurel tried, there was an agreement, a title, but he did not finish his speech when he was interrupted. "This is just the beginning," was Laurel's answer. Everyone was indignant. How dare she interrupt His Highness? A golden glow began to emanate from the girl, enveloping her and caressing her, showing everyone that she could use her magical aura. Magic in the Empire is gradually weakening, so people with power are valued, but there is one drawback. With the birth of a child, all power or mana disappeared, so not many magicians wanted to start a family. The solution was just such knights with a magical aura. Their eyes sparkled with gold. She could stand up for her family. The king and prince leaned forward, exclaiming that they had found a jewel, another master in the empire. The prince was also happy at this news. Surprise knew no bounds. Receiving the title became undeniable. Ian was stunned by such an event, opened his eyes and looked at the girl. Marquise Laurel became the first Marquise girl who knew how to use her ability to control a magical aura. And 3 years later, the girl takes out her sword and rushes into a brawl, because this time they have already gone too far. She attracted the attention of the men. Everything around darkened. They trembled with fear and formed a tunnel through which Laurel was heading. Coming closer, the knight raised her hand to her head and looked to the side, muttering something about crazy people. The guys were delighted when they heard that the heroine was going to see their captain again, and they squealed with excitement. She grinned, clasped her fists together, knew that their discipline was bad, so she would teach them a lesson personally. Through a magical communicator, the soldiers of the second night contacted him when he was calmly drinking tea with the prince, but now he looked up from this activity and was now reprimanding the men. After completion, I heard a reprimand from the prince about Laurel and the conversation with her. Edgar was indignant and asked not to meddle in his personal life, but Kane jumped up with his mug and pointed his finger at him, swearing. As soon as the first captain remembered Laurel, a blush immediately colored his cheeks and breathed out her name. The young man thought that the girl hated him, but the prince jumped up. He was looking only for good moments. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and replied that now he would take care of his love affairs himself. He raised his eyes to Kane, asked not to interfere. The relationship with the Marquise must continue. He looked without blinking. His blue eyes gave off ice. The men wondered what kind of important meeting Laurel had today. The prince nervously bit his nails. The guy jumped up nervously and sat down next to Edgar, bringing his smiling face closer, also impatient to find out who the lady was spending the evening with. The knight stood up, walked up to the servant, put his hand on his shoulder, calming and encouraging, to which the prince seethed with indignation. Eddie ruffled his hair with his hand and asked calmly for His Highness to leave all these love clubs. Moreover, without turning to the men, he leaned against the doorframe. He didn't like the Marquise that much. Prince Kane laughed, his cheeks turned red, exhaled, gave advice not to lie, since he doesn't know how. Futile attempts to say he doesn't like them were unsuccessful. The girl ran and waved to the young man. She was a little late and now felt guilty, squinting her eyes at the female figure. It was the girl's brother, Belfort, who turned around and smiled joyfully. He had just arrived, just like his sister. Laurel was worried that she wouldn't have time to see the young man off. She asked excitedly if he had collected everything and calmed him down. They talked about new discoveries, about a parallel world, about the boy's move to the Tower of Magicians. The girl smiled softly. Warmth was reflected in her gaze. Bellum's parents would have been proud, she said. Rubbing her eyes as if inadvertently asking her sister about the fight. This was the 46th time they had already fought. She sighed and muttered about the rumors. The girl thought about this, but remembered all the meetings with the captain. All the documents that she handed over had to be checked personally by him. He constantly accidentally circles around her territory, and always, absolutely when he sees her, he has a happy face. During general training, he constantly watches the heroine, worrying that she does not receive serious injuries. Remembering everything, she clenched her fists, growled, got angry, didn't understand at all why the first captain didn't like her so much. Her brother was surprised. She coughed, waving her brother off, and saw him off. He had to go, but he rummaged around in the bag, looking for something that needed to be given. She was surprised when she found a box in her hand. Belfort laughed. Not just any box. He smiled smugly, winked, folded his hands, did it himself. Letters will come to her because the Tower of Magicians is too far away. While the confused Laurel looked at the box and turned it over in her hands, the guy did not shut up, talked about its properties, called it a negotiation box, put a note, and it was immediately in his hands. She lovingly stroked the gifted item. It was the best thing her brother created, and she told the guy about it. They were interrupted. The prince's servant came up and said that Edgar was waiting for Laurel in his office. The girl was indignant, scolding this obnoxious man. The brother and sister hugged. The girl, as the eldest, gave instructions to the younger one to carefully reach the tower. Seething with anger, she hit her face, went to meet the captain, was dissatisfied with what she called whenever he wanted. I didn't even have time to get to the office when a letter arrived from my brother. I happily took it out and started reading as I walked. But as soon as her eyes read the first line, the greeting, her face darkened. Joy gave way to thoughts. She wrote the letter herself, to herself, but only from another world, using Belle's box. The other Leah hoped that at least this letter could get through. The signature said that she was Fariel. Edgar immediately came to mind. Men's voices were heard from the open door, arguing about where to put the bouquets. The girl listened and became interested in what was happening. I looked inside and was surprised to see scattered flower petals and two guys arguing. The man turned around, stared in surprise at the captain. Laurel muttered his name. She turned sharply away from the guys reading the letter, could not believe the truth, and believed that her brother was joking with her in this way. She screamed loudly and grabbed her head, but it was her handwriting. The men were scared from the scream. They were worried. Edgar began to talk about the strangeness of the marquise, turned around, gritted her teeth, could not fall in love with such a person, and growled. She screamed, opening the doors. What it was let him bother to explain to her everything that was happening here. He closed his eyes, raised his hand to his head, and muttered that he shouldn't pay attention, at which Laurel became even more agitated. Having become gloomy, she turned to the guy. She didn't have much free time. Once again, she didn't want to be disturbed quietly, but she answered firmly. She turned around and tried not to think about the note. She didn't care about the captain's personal affairs. She raised her head already in front of the door, gave advice to the guy that it was better to prepare the confession yourself, and smiled. The man breathed her name. The others surfaced, whispering about how the mission had failed. He turned to his subordinates, glooming before his eyes, dissatisfied with the fact that they showed self-will. The prince recoiled from him, screamed, covered himself with his hand. There is no need to draw hasty conclusions. The assistants behind him also howled. Cain admitted that he had decided to have a dinner party, blushed and leaned over, boasting about his idea. Suddenly, the prince screamed, swearing. Why Edgar needed such an impudent woman, he didn't understand. The captain of the 1st Battalion admitted that there was no specific thing about the girl. He just liked all of her. The prince chuckled stupidly, learning that Eddie had fallen head over heels in love. Realizing that he had said too much, he became embarrassed, put his hand to his lips, closed his eyes, his cheeks showed heat, and decisively changed the subject. Laurel sat in the room without taking her eyes off the box that her brother gave her for letters. I received a new letter from myself, which said that this was not all a mockery. However, I wrote, talking about parallel worlds. The girl was holding a letter in her hands, covering her mouth with her hand. Her eyes ran over the lines. 5 years, such a difference between their worlds. She also told a secret phrase that only Laurel knew to prove that she was from another world. She raised her eyes, became gloomy, and decided to talk to her brother, to definitely discuss everything on his next visit. After all, Belle is the best magician, a magnificent one, sat down to write a reply letter, and dipped her pen in ink. She asked the question that tormented her as soon as she saw the name, about Edgar, and put it in the box. A sound was heard and the letter was sent. The response note did not take long to arrive. It was already written about happiness with him. It was also interesting to find out about Eddie in the captain's world. The girl grimaced. Sweat ran down her face when the conversation turned to the guy's favorite dish. She wrinkled her nose as the lady from the letter called him her favorite. But Laurel was surprised by other lines. It also said Tire, and the question of how she managed to become a marquise. She raised her hand to her lips and thought. Her father was seriously injured in that attack on the carriage. She asked about her father, what happened to him, because he simply resigned. She covered her mouth in fear. They had suffered from criminals. Now this phrase was beating in her head. She thought that they had suffered by accident. She jumped up, dropped the chair, spilled the inkwell on the floor, and the ink stained the letter. She asked Laurel to find and punish them for her too. The girl was sitting on the bed. A maid approached her and asked her to close her eyes. The woman put a cold bag to her eyes. The mistress tried to brush her off, saying that she didn't cry, she just rubbed it. She took the ice, thanked the nanny, and assured her that everything was fine, everything was normal, and nothing had happened. I remembered that there was a brother there in a parallel world, and he was actively being prepared to become a marquise, so the girl was able to get married. In that world, Mum and Dad are still alive. She has a brother. Happiness is in the air, but here they are dead. She thought about it, removed the bag, and looked at it. An investigation in their world revealed an accident that happened to her parents. It's true that Laurel also didn't know anything when the nanny tried to take the ice and asked her to leave it. She will start from the very beginning. Duke Fariel was involved in the investigation. A serious man came to mind. The woman screamed, took the ice and applied the bag herself, scolding her that she was trying to do everything, but she needed to be able to relax. She looked at the nanny. A new cafe had recently opened, and said that young noblewomen often drop by there. She pulled back the curtain, turned around. The rain has passed. Let her go, get her favorite desserts. No need to make her old nanny worry. Confused, she raised her eyes, exhaled, and the nanny muttered that she needed to take dessert for the Fariel family as well. But the woman shouted, reminding him that she was invited to the lady, and she meant her, not her son. We were greeted by girls at the entrance to the cafe, light-hearted, smiling, and invited us to move on. Laurel squealed joyfully, immediately saw a caring female hand here. Her eyes lit up from all the splendor. The girls sitting at the table giggled. They saw the marquise and chirped enthusiastically. Even in this cafe, she was the most beautiful of all. I headed to the counter, where the seller raised her hands and almost screamed with joy, realizing who had come in and was buying dessert. Stars lit up in her eyes. She held her hands to her face. She wouldn't regret coming here. They wouldn't disappoint. She showed them their menu, all the delicious cakes they had, and also offered original desserts, new ones, intoxicating with the smell so that one's mouth watered at the mere sight. The other cake was chocolate, so delicious you could go crazy. There is also a third cake, a lemon cake, which is the best 3 desserts on the cafe menu. The woman leaned over and whispered confidentially that there were still many positions here. If she wanted, she could tell about them. The captain shook his head. Laurel's eyes were already glued to the chocolate dessert, frowning if she could try it. The girls whispered behind their backs. It was surprising about their love for cakes, but they remembered that she was a lady, and upon hearing this, the captain became gloomy. And the memories themselves took her to those men who shouted that a sword is an adornment for a woman, a weak body for a knight. All the offensive words flashed through. The seller brought me out of my memories, apologized, muttered that it was all a gift, I needed help with this. The girls heard. They apparently made a mistake, tried to whisper about something else, but Laurel smiled, pleased with the effect produced. She handed over a pink box with desserts, thinking how she would walk around the city with this in her hands, and when she heard that there was no chocolate cake, she was upset. But she didn't show her torment. She thanked him and took the box. It was a failure on all fronts. Distressed, Laurel trudged down the street. It didn't matter that it was delicious. She wouldn't come to this cafe again. The guys were already watching her through the fence. The guys were talking. One thought that the girl liked sweets, the other that he liked walking around the cafe. Laurel sat at the table with the girl in the garden. She enjoyed the cakes, thanked her, and the exchange of pleasantries ended. The princess felt sad. In her homeland she was real, but here she serves as decoration. Her lips touched the cup. The girl felt very lonely here. No one approached her. The days flew by, boringly and sadly. But the marquise was different. She visits the princess every day. She was frank, and for this she was very grateful. The girl's conversation also turned to the dress that the maid insisted on. The girl smiled radiantly. She was interested. The captain had just begun to talk about the dress from the prince's birthday, when the princess interrupted her by saying that she wouldn't wear this dress, and they laughed. The lady jumped up and shouted at the marquise that she urgently needed to throw away that dress and never wear it again. Laurel stammered in fear when she heard the princess take everything into her own hands, a shadow looming over her. Edgar looked at the prince indignantly, hissed, did not understand why he was following him and what he had come up with. He turned around and shouted, his apologies seeming entertaining, his blue eyes blazing with ice. Hanging over the prince, if it weren't for them and their idea, he wouldn't have to apologize, the guy cursed. The prince ran away from him, shouting that he was of royal blood, cowering in fear, trying to hide from the man's anger. Edgar was left alone, watching as Cain and his servants quickly ran away. Be careful, you might fall, you thought. He walked, looking around, looking for Captain Laurel, turning his head in different directions. She wasn't in the office, so I went outside, saw a girl in a dress ahead of me, and thought that she was a princess, which meant the marquise was somewhere nearby. Making a bow, he turned to Michelle because he considered her a princess. The lady did not turn around, she froze. But when he turned around, both the man and the woman looked surprised. She stood in front of him in a beautiful dress. They stared at each other. Silence reigned. Edgar tried to understand what he was seeing in front of him, whether it was the captain. She leaned over, her cheeks turned red, and began stuttering to say that Michelle had given this dress for going to tea. She pointed to the dress. It was all because of his mother. She screamed, got angry, and began to press on the guy. He began to apologize. Eddie touched her cheek with his hand. Laurel raised her eyes to him. This gesture was too intimate. She blushed, threw his hand off her cheek, flared up, how dare he touch her face so casually, and was indignant. The man was confused. He could not say anything. He could not say anything. Seeing the anger, he still considered the girl beautiful. The prince slowly approached them and admired Laurel's dress. It fit perfectly. His Majesty examined the couple carefully. Blue eyes, short blonde hair, and a soft smile. The man leaned towards the girl, touched a strand of her hair. Edgar's eyes widened at such a picture. The prince was interested in what they forgot here. The man couldn't stand this. He tried to get into the conversation, but Laurel beat him to it and threw off his hand, saying not to worry about anything. The girl angrily remarked that she fulfilled her duties, regardless of her clothes, and would protect Michelle in any way. Besides, she handed in her work. Now she has free time. Eddie opened his mouth in surprise, listening to the speech addressed to His Highness. Prince Cain approached. They collided with Archduke Jan, standing opposite each other and glaring at each other with anger. The man turned to the couple, sent them to finish the reception. Let the captain take the girl to her mother. They still go to the same place. They tried to argue with the prince, but he shook his finger and laughed, saying that this was an order, especially since it would not be so effective. He whispered that he could go to the cafe because Laurel liked it, and waved his hand right there, sending the kids on their way. He finally sent this couple out. The prince, from the excess of his feelings, could not stand still. Every now and then he jumped and waved his handkerchief. The Archduke made a remark that you should behave according to your status. The guy was indignant and pouted. The young man became serious, put his hand on Ian's shoulder, and admitted that he was restraining himself only because of nostalgia for the past. He warned that this line should not be crossed, stood opposite him, and leaned slightly towards the Archduke. In the carriage, the young people sat with their backs turned, each thinking about his own. It was not at all joyful to be in this position. Gritting their teeth, they sat next to each other, their knees touching. The girl thought about how narrow the carriage was, the guy about his knees that were too close. Without turning around, he said stutteringly that it was inconvenient. He understood everything, but he had to be patient a little. They would arrive soon. She nodded in agreement. He leaned forward a little, blushed, and began to quietly apologize to the captain of the 2nd Battalion. I apologized for everything that had happened in recent days. I was worried and decided to explain everything to the girl. He sharply raised his head and looked. His blue eyes flashed. He respects her, it sounded from Edgar. Laurel remembered that she wrote to herself from a parallel world, that her beloved was so caring, always worried about her and worried about her comfort. She opened her mouth slightly, stared at the guy. All the words from the letter were spinning in the girl's head. Lost in her thoughts, she did not immediately hear what Eddie continued to say about how he also admired the captain. The man remembered that time, 3 years ago, when he introduced the captain of the 2nd Battalion to his people, the lady standing modestly behind him. From now on, Edgar proclaimed, the girl will dominate the Red Wolves. The men began to sniffle indignantly, dissatisfied with the fact that they had put the woman in charge. Whispers and mockery could be heard. The guy tried to say that he needed to watch, but Laurel interrupted. She just needed 1 minute. Everything seemed to go dark as the captain took a step towards the soldiers, drawing his sword as he walked. With a slight smile, she invited the young men to check who was weak here. She wanted to arrange a duel. She was determined. The sword flew up, landed on the shoulder of the frightened man. There was a scream and wide eyes. The girl showed her strength. She turned around, gave Edgar a smile, lowered her sword. She didn't mind if everyone attacked at the same time. And after that, Sir Eddie respects him. She couldn't believe it. Then she turned around and looked carefully at the man who was laughing at her from the very beginning. In the carriage, she grabbed her mouth, tried to restrain herself. She wouldn't allow herself to be deceived. She didn't want to believe the words. She turned her face to the guy, asked him what he had just said, smiled, and confirmed with a nod. She waved her hands. Everything was fine, tried to justify herself, smiled, and became embarrassed. He laughed, closed his eyes, raised his hand to his face. Its flickering and embarrassment made the man touch. Green eyes opened. You couldn't take your eyes off such a face. Laurel didn't know that Edgar could have such a sweet face. The girl gave in to the guy, frightening him with her pressure, and screamed that she would now ask him about something important. She put her hand to her chest and asked for documents that were in the investigation of the attack on her parents. He looked distantly at Laurel. She continued to ask, did not question his methods and methods of operation, but it was important to look and see for yourself. I honestly admitted that I tried to avoid this topic for a long time. I became sad, but now it's time to find out. She bowed her head, turned to the man, asked for forgiveness for her emotions. Edgar was silent. He put his hand on the girl's trembling hand. He realized that he actually wanted Laurel to find out the details of the incident. His eyes radiated warmth when he looked at her. There was no need to apologize. He smiled without taking his eyes off. They looked at each other. Edgar was pleased with himself. Laurel frowned, looked from under her forehead. She was confused by something. She just didn't understand. When they entered the house, on the stairs the mistress of the house was very sorry, but they would have to cancel their meeting today. The heroine laughed loudly, announced that she had brought sweets and would leave them, and assured that there was nothing wrong. Eddie also smiled, thanked him for accompanying him. The guy suggested discussing the issue about his parents tomorrow. Anna went down the stairs. She was ashamed of the situation. She asked her son to join her again. She turned her head and called Lloyd. Edgar screamed indignantly. He did not expect such a turn. A guy came out to them, smiled and winked at everyone in the hall. A cheerful fellow could be described in one word. The girl realized that this was an attempt at matchmaking. She was now just at the age when they were looking for a husband. With his mouth open, Edgar watched as Lloyd extended his hand to the girl, sweat running down his cheeks in indignation. The lady leaned over and thanked Anna. She was sure that this woman's second son was a good young man. And she was just about to accept Lloyd's hand when the guy who had been standing next to her all this time and was silent grabbed her wrist. Edgar grabbed the hand, pulled Laurel towards him, apologized to everyone, but that wouldn't do, he answered. This action surprised everyone. The heroine stared at the young man in shock. Her hand lay in the man's hand. He leaned over, whispered, asked if he could join her today, and fell silent in anticipation. He immediately realized what he had done out of emotion, removed his hands from the girl, waved them, tried to rehabilitate himself, and offered to look at the papers on her question. While Lloyd and Anna were unhappy with this interference, Laurel immediately jumped at the opportunity. And in this hall, standing and looking at each other, the girl realized that from the very beginning Edgar had not laughed at her. She was embarrassed, blushed, turned away. Now she believed in his admiration and smiled. She raised her hands. It's still not clear why she did this. Laurel was angry. Eddie turned to his mother, apologized, and bowed. And although his mother was gloomy, Lloyd exhaled and laughed. He wanted to honestly admit that he was relieved. He touched his forehead. In general, he felt ashamed in front of his bride. Anna pointed at the guy, calling for silence. She threatened with her finger, leaned towards the man, hoping that it was just work and nothing more. The girl bowed until the next meeting, said the words of farewell. Her eyes were lowered. The guy was nearby. They turned away and headed for the exit. Laurel shared her plans. The widow looked at this couple, understanding everything. Anna raised her hand to her lips, fixed her gaze on the guys, and chuckled, as if confirming something. Laurel leaned over and closed her eyes, pleased that she saw the papers so quickly. Eddie was flattered. But the girl was angry. Of course, everything was pleasant. But for some reason, it was in the cafe. That very thing. They came to look at the papers. The eyes of the young ladies were turned to them. Edgar showed only the most important documents. But if she needs more, just let her say it. Feeling the eyes of those present on her, she covered her mouth with her palm and quietly asked why they came to this cafe. Laurel did not feel comfortable. He remembered the prince, but replied that someone had recommended this place, closed his eyes, pleased with himself, and a drop of sweat rolled down the marquise's temple. She coughed into her fist, closed her eyes. Not everyone would correctly understand their presence. Behind there was a cooing couple. She leaned over again and whispered that the situation was too oppressive. The young man did not understand what she was getting at. They were interrupted by a smiling waiter who clarified the order. Laurel turned red as a lobster. Seeing this, the guy asked for another minute. I started to find out if they weren't comfortable, they could go to another place. I was embarrassed, immediately exclaimed that it wasn't worth it and began to choose dessert, embarrassed. The waiter chattered like a magpie, again listed what desserts were available in their cafe, and covered herself with a sheet of menu from the captain's eyes. Red to the tips of her ears, Laurel squeaked for Sir Edgar to choose and closed her eyes. The man himself was confused by this choice, asked for the last option, but when he heard the name, he changed his mind. The previous one, he settled on it. Everyone at the table began to blush. The girl was already starting to find it funny to watch the guy, cleared his throat, chose the chocolate stalker. I didn't think that choosing dessert was so difficult. The girl laughed, covering her mouth with her palm. It turns out that the captain is a chocolate lover. Eddie blushed but didn't see anything strange in it. That day we laughed a lot, ate desserts. When the sun was setting, the couple was still in the cafe, sitting behind papers. After painstakingly studying the papers, the captain noticed a discrepancy. The horse that was pulling the carriage was black, with white fur over all its hooves, she asked Edgar. He confirmed it, because he himself saw it with his own eyes, a dead horse with such legs. She was surprised, her eyes widened. This couldn't be happening. Sweat ran down her temple, their horse had white fur only above 3 hooves. The girl was sure of this, because it was this horse that her parents adored, and the realization of the murder of people close to her immediately penetrated inside. I wanted to ask to start this old investigation again, but I didn't know whether the young man would agree. She raised her eyes and remained indecisive. Before she could make a sound, Edgar interrupted the girl, running his eyes over the document. He apologized for the quality of his work and admitted the mistake. While the girl continued to doubt, the captain put his hand to his chest and asked permission to correct his mistake. Laurel screamed, her cheeks turned red. It was she who had to ask for a favor, she drawled in confusion. She raised her shining eyes to the man. Gratitude shone in her eyes. She could not believe in her success. The young man gently corrected. He was thanking for another chance. His face haunted the lady all day today. Although he seemed like a stranger, I felt that the man was so close to me. I listened to him tell me what he would do first in this matter again. She remembered where she saw such a look, in her parents. Her father always looked at her mother like that. Unexpectedly, she asked the guy a question about his reputation and the newly opened case. He met her gaze directly and replied that he would suffer. The girl was trying to find out something for herself, so she asked directly whether the young man was doing this only out of respect for her. Head bowed over the table, shoulders tense, not only was the answer heard, Laurel's eyes widened. Edgar admitted that he would receive a reprimand for the reopened case, and it would also be difficult to assemble a group, but despite all this, he was ready. I would like to correct my mistake. I looked up at the girl, even if it was already too late. He clenched his hand into a fist on his knee. Her parents were friends with his mother. They were always kind to him. Laurel listened attentively. If the death of her parents, the man continued, was not an accident, then he must look into it. He offered his deepest apologies, put his hand on his chest, and again asked for permission for a chance to make things right. The girl became embarrassed, bowed her head, raised her hand to her face, remained silent, and about to answer, chuckled. I could barely restrain my emotions and asked to finish for today. The guy noticed the torment and nodded in agreement. Laurel was almost leaving when she remembered something and turned to the man without turning around. She didn't turn around because tears were rolling down the girl's cheeks. She thanked Edgar, sincerely and warmly. The young man jumped up, alarmed, following the captain with a worried look. Prince Cain was flying towards him across the entire hall, shouting that he had sent the girl off. The guy turned to him. He didn't expect to see them. The boy's face immediately changed. He patted Eddie on the shoulder reassuringly and suggested that he sit down. He noticed that the prince had a mustache glued on, asked what kind of masquerade was going on. The boy boasted, "It turned out well." He demanded to know what happened here, but Edgar waved him off. He said more than once that he was of little interest in the girl. "She's too good," the character noticed, bowed his head, raised his finger, thought. But he's also attracted because she's the only marquise and captain of the 2nd Battalion. I thought an equally great man would approach her, lower his eyes, an ideal man. And speculation began to flow about what this young man should be like, what his status was, and both the prince and his servant were horrified by this. Cain's scream brought him out of his thoughts and asked his friend to calm down and stop, because it wouldn't suit him if Laurel married someone else. And although the young man's words sounded like agreement, his actions betrayed his nervousness. Out of anger, he stuck a pencil into the tabletop with only one thought about something else in the captain's mind. One knight came to the prince's mind who would suit the girl very well. This is Pip, the son of a viscount. Edgar exhaled, put his hand to his head. If in this way he is trying to arouse jealousy in him, then it's not worth it, the prince cried. And yet, Cain did not understand why they could not be together. What was the reason for this? But the reason was different. He closed his eyes, turned away, and believed that Captain Laurel hated him. The servant, of course, assured the cafe administrator that they would compensate for all the damage, calmed him down, and the men bowed their heads. Cain rubbed his chin. You can come up with something in any situation. His eyes began to dart. Laurel trained, worked diligently with her sword, honed her movements, deftly dodged mental enemies. The captain remembered her parents, who could have done this to them. There were many questions. Unfortunately, there were no answers. Something haunted the girl, tormented her. Who replaced the horse? Where did the coachman and bell go? The image of her brother appeared before the lady. What would she say to her brother? She stopped, exhaled, leaned over, time to catch her breath. She trained too hard. She regained her breath, looked over her shoulder. The nanny was running towards her and screaming. The obese woman was moving quite quickly. All wet, the woman clutched the collar of her shirt. She knew not to disturb Laurel, but Lord Fariel stopped by and left a gift. The girl was surprised, opened her mouth slightly. The nanny was already holding out a black box to her. As soon as this box fell into her hands, she screamed. Her face became red and wet from the heat, and she was overcome with anger. I looked at the box, really, I thought. He personally came to just give a gift. But she immediately screamed, pulled her hands away. The young man had been suspicious all day and assumed that there was a bomb there. I remembered everything that Edgar said and how he behaved in the cafe. His words were so sincere, his face brightened. With caution, she untied the bow on the box, kept her distance, her hands began to tremble, and tried to very carefully lift the lid. It was not at all what I expected to see in this box, a beautiful bouquet of flowers, a gift from Eddie. The aroma filled the room. I lifted the flowers closer to my face. Surprised, Laurel turned her gaze to the squeaking box, was amazed by the captain's gift, did not immediately take the note, and stood for some time with flowers in her hand. She put the bouquet back into the box and with her other hand tried to reach and open the box with the letter. She unfolded it and began to read. She wrote she was from a parallel world. She said that her beloved gave a bouquet of flowers, but not just, but a whole carriage. I bought all the flowers that mean love in the language of flowers, that's why there are so many of them. Now they have replaced all the flowers in the garden. Laurel chuckled and looked at her bouquet of flowers. She called the nanny, holding flowers in her hands. The woman ran in and began to inquire about the girl's well-being. She showed the bouquet. Did she know what kind of flowers? The nanny gasped. It's adenium, exclaimed, the most expensive flowers, and they bloom in the red desert, she responded admiringly. She pressed her carefully to herself, was surprised when she found out that in the language of flowers these flowers meant consolation. Her eyes widened from the realization of closeness with a man. A soft smile appeared on Laurel's lips. She looked again at the flowers. The man's concern was pleasant. In the office of the captain of the 1st Battalion, the men sat and reread documents, double-checked everything. Edgar sent Deacon to rest, thanked him for his help, but he himself will stay and review the papers again. The guy screamed. He didn't understand why the captain worked so hard. He slept only 4 hours in 3 days. Love, of course, is wonderful. The deacon continued to be indignant, but not to his own detriment. Edgar was indignant. He did not do this out of love for the captain. The young man remembered that gloomy box in which there were flowers. He was indignant. He needed to give something light and beautiful. Edgar replied that he was told that Laurel loved black. That's why he sent this color. The boy shook his head. He trusted this club with the prince too much. Deacon clasped his hands and looked at the captain. He didn't understand why he couldn't say his feelings directly. But he reminded that there are few women who rule their family. The boy was surprised and cried out. Eddie continued, Captain Laurel tries very hard, makes great efforts, but no one appreciates her work, so her burden is heavier than anyone. The man admitted that he could not ask her to give up everything and become a duchess. His hand on the paper clenched into a fist, crushing it. His eyes showed pain. He raised his hand to his face, because this is the attitude she deserves, and he said without hiding his respect. He closed his eyes, asked for forgiveness. The deacon, he understood everything. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. The knock was repeated. Laurel looked in the door and asked the captain if he was free, not realizing at all that the men had just discussed the lady. She came closer. The guys greeted her. They were interested in the matter with the horse, the autopsy today. The girl stopped short, saw Edgar's gloomy face, and began to babble. If he was busy, then maybe she could go alone. The captain jumped up. They went together. Laurel turned pale. She did not expect such agility from the man. And then the girl rushed to Edgar as he began to collapse from fatigue, clasped her hands, and rushed towards him. The man fell straight into Laurel's arms, wrapped her arms around him, pressed her whole body against him, holding him. She squinted her eyes at the guy, worried about him. There was concern in her eyes, whether everything was okay with him. Edgar turned red, sweat poured out, and Edgar couldn't say a word. This was also unusual for him. He turned away from her. His face was red. He was embarrassed. Everything was fine with him. He spoke hastily. He assured her that everything was absolutely fine. The girl argued, it's clear that he's not feeling well, so he can go alone. The deacon remained silent, only giggling, watching the couple. And while the guy was happy for them that progress was visible, a guy burst into the office screaming and fell. It was the same son of the Viscount Pip. He jumped up to the girl, fell to his knee and took her hand, stars sparkling with joy in his eyes. Edgar's face changed when he saw the girl's hand in the man's and raised his eyebrows in surprise. The two continued the conversation, smiling sweetly at each other, but the captain was burning with rage, his dark face betraying dissatisfaction. Pip presented her with chocolate cake and hot tea. Laurel was surprised, raised her hand to her mouth. Edgar was indignant. While his face changed color from dark to pale, the boy took advantage of the situation. Later they headed along the path to the horses. The girl did not expect Pip to bring her a cake. She shared it with the man. Edgar was gloomy, and Laurel did not stop chirping and praised the boy. Apparently he was apologizing for arguing with the soldiers in this way. The man who accompanied them to the horse explained that he hesitated for a long time what to do, but since the gentleman loved this horse, they decided to do everything in the best possible way. Edgar noticed that the girl's cheerful mood had disappeared. He offered to check it himself. He looked worried but refused help. She wanted to do it herself. As soon as the escort approached the digging guys, his face changed. Something was wrong. Laurel walked closer as the men shouted at each other in confusion. She looked down. Eddie looked surprised too. They were sure of it. They were burying the horse here, Lord, and the guy looked over his shoulder. But in the grave there were definitely not the remains of a horse. This was confirmed by the heroine. She saw a chimera, since her brother studied magic. Tears streamed down her cheeks. They were definitely killed. Now the girl is sure of this because this is not her parents' horse. Laurel clenched her hand into a fist. Edgar watched her, concern reflected in his gaze. He wanted to touch his hand but hesitated. He didn't take the risk. Instead, he held out a handkerchief, asked to take it, turned around. Her wet face from tears looked at the outstretched hand. The man asked to trust him. He would become her sword. He spoke decisively, fully aware of his words. A man in a red suit was reading a book while sitting and looked down to see white mice running around. I asked someone how long they would be in this outback. I already wanted to leave quickly. The man raised his eyes, smiled. There was no way to please. What he didn't like this time, Ignis clarified. The young man tried. He ran up. If the girl needed something, just to say, he would do everything. He looked ingratiatingly. He looked at the lady with a loving gaze, exhaled, put his hand to his cheek, and would kill anyone for her sake. She pressed her to her knees, stroked the man's head. They waited for the old man for a long time. The guy clung to her contentedly. They can leave if they just want to. Madness flashed in the guy's eyes. They can get rid of people right now. The chimera is ready and waiting for an order. A smile appeared on the girl's lips, as if she knew that the fun would soon begin. A bird sat on her hand and grabbed it with its claws. A slender girl with red hair stood up, raised her hands, straightened her hood. The smile on her face did not leave. There will be a lot of interesting things ahead. It's time to destroy them. Back in the office, Laurel and Edgar are again leafing through and looking through the papers, lost in their thoughts. The girl read carefully and did not pay attention to the guy. He only did what he admired, so the question took him by surprise. She handed over the documents. They also need to be checked. The young people's fingers touched. From this closeness, a trembling struck. Edgar threw up his hands and scattered all the papers, making Laurel frightened by his actions. He sat back down. The man's face turned red, covered his mouth with his hand, and worriedly asked about his well-being. She touched his shoulder with her hand. Edgar blushed even more, and the girl was worried about him. She thought something was hurting him. Laurel jumped up. She would call the doctor. The man stopped her, raised a glass of water to his mouth, and cleared his throat. She exhaled, sat back down, and returned to the documents. Not noticing Eddie's thoughtful look, they reviewed everything. Everything was ready. She looked up and hoped that the meeting regarding the reinvestigation would go smoothly. The meeting was exciting. The case was closed 3 years ago. People reminded the king. They did not understand why it was worth raising everything again. Laurel tried to explain that they were forming a team and would check again. There was a reason for this. Bowing her head, she asked to think of her not as a knight, but as a suffering resident. Ian couldn't remain silent, so he spoke offensive words for the girl, saying that she was taking advantage of her position, so she was asking to open a case. The men argued again, considering it a privilege. They would be blamed if they raised everything again, and His Highness assured him of this. Sweat ran down Laurel's face. She couldn't raise her head. Anger overwhelmed her. She urgently needed to come up with something. I heard Edgar speak, squinted at him. He was talking about the girl's father and that everyone received help from him at least once. He reminded those present that the man was always the first to go into battle and open his warehouses. Many people still come to his grave to this day. Despite the time of year, flowers were always there. The young man did not think that the people would be against the opening of the case of this great man. No one would condemn him. The man bowed his head. Even if this discredits him as initially responsible for the closure, he would like to reopen the case. Edgar asked His Majesty. Laurel looked at the guy in shock, as if she had seen him for the first time. The old king clarified that he would indeed take responsibility for his words from the guy, who nodded. His Highness stood up, extended his hand, and gave his permission to create a team for the case. The girl's late father was dear to her, and the king, whoever objects to this decision means against him himself, raised her shining eyes and sincerely thanked him. A satisfied prince was moving along the corridor. The captains were walking slightly behind him. The guy was happy about the work done and congratulated them. Suddenly, Laurel Yang called out. He would like to discuss something with her in private. The girl looked at the man in surprise, bowed his head, put his hand on his chest. He wants to help the investigation team. But he wanted to talk to the captain personally. He raised his head. His blue eyes sparkled with ice. He admitted that Sir Edgar's words made an impression on him and gave him food for thought. He put his hand on her shoulder and understands that it has been difficult for her since the death of her parents. He leaned too close and apologized heartfeltly for adding fuel to the fire. Laurel removed his hand, smiling. No need to touch, understands him, but no need to touch her. Ian laughed, removed his hand, narrowed his eyes, agreed with the girl, but stood his ground. He still wanted to help her team. Since Belle left to study, they do not have a magician. The girl raised her shining eyes, listened attentively, nodded, agreeing that without a magician the work would be difficult. That's what they decided, since the Ministry of Magic is under the control of the Archduke, the lady reminded. He would send the Archmage to help. He leaned with both hands on the cane, didn't really expect an answer from the girl. Everything had already been decided, she whispered hesitant agreement. As he left, throwing over his shoulder that he would see him soon, Laurel bowed goodbye and thanked his lordship. Without turning around, he remembered something. He wanted the captain to know. He fell silent, gathering his thoughts and making the girl nervous. He squinted his eyes quietly but audibly, said that he also respected Laurel's late father. A smile flashed on his compressed lips. Prince Cain screamed with excess emotion when the girl returned to them, asked how she was, raised his hands to his chest, clenched them into fists. He exhaled, frowned. He was very worried about her. Edgar clarified whether everything was really all right. The heroine assured and reassured everyone present. She admitted honestly that the Archmage offered help, but she was skeptical at first. Cain folded his arms over his chest. He believed that Ian wanted to slip his man to them, Laurel argued. Not necessarily so, since he added that her parents were dear to him too. The prince rubbed his chin with his hand. It was strange to hear all this from the Archduke, Eddie assented. Now they need to be very careful. He explained for Laurel, turned to her. Archduke Yan never does anything for nothing. He is sniffing out something here for his own benefit. The girl did not pay attention to Yan's attitude towards her, turned her head and thanked Edgar. She did not know that he treated her parents this way. She was reflected in the cup of tea. If they were alive, Laurel understood from the letters that life could be different. Baking pies with her mother, having fun with her father, arranging surprises. She remembered all this and tears streamed from her eyes, thanked her, and knew for sure that they would be very happy. The men froze. They were surprised by such a reaction from the captain. They could not move or speak. They watched and waited. She covered herself with her hand, hiding her tears, apologized. The prince waved his hand. He didn't see anything strange in this. Let him not pay attention to them. Edgar did not say anything, but touched her shoulder with his hand, hiding his eyes, did not look at the girl, looked in surprise, amazed at such a movement, concern not typical of him. He lowered his head and said soothingly, if her parents had known that they would have such an amazing daughter, they would have been proud of it and happy. I noticed the guy's condition. His body was shaking, beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He was even worse than she was. Laurel laughed through her tears, raised her hand to her mouth. She didn't think that the captain was such a good one, she joked, and the situation immediately became better. She laughed louder, thought he was arrogant, that he was like a wallflower, closed her eyes, couldn't stop laughing. The guy turned pale. I waved her away, closed my eyes. There was a misunderstanding. No apology was needed. My cheeks turned red. She laughed it off, got up. She had to go. She had things to do. The men said goodbye to her and hurried to leave. The prince smiled, brought his face closer to Eddie. Everything seemed to go well, nodded and agreed. She closed the door, leaned her forehead against it, exhaled, thought she was going crazy, and knocked lightly on the door with her forehead. Sweat ran down her red face. She didn't understand why the young man's face looked so attractive at that moment. She was definitely going crazy. Several guys and 2 women who are here will again begin to investigate the murder of the Marquis and his wife. Edgar introduced the magician from the ministry. You need to be polite with her. The girl with short purple hair bowed her head. The girl's name was Katie, the head of the Ministry of Magic. A deep voice replied that it was an honor for her to participate in the investigation. The guys from the 1st Battalion and the 2nd Battalion shouted over each other and admitted how glad they were for her. Edgar shouted, calling Sir Pip to rest, himself horrified by the behavior of the men. Laurel didn't think long. She hit a guy from her battalion. He immediately became quiet, and those present at the table looked surprised. The boy fell to the floor from the blow. The heroine turned around, looked at the people, apologized. She taught them a lesson. Katie closed her eyes. She was honest. She was enjoying this lively atmosphere. Apologies were not appropriate. Edgar explained that the girl was the sister of Her Highness Michelle. The guys screamed. They recognized the smile, which is why it caused a stir. They showed her the thumbs up. The girl was admired to become the head of the Ministry of Magic, having arrived in an unfamiliar country. Of course, Katie was flattered by this, but she didn't show it, immediately switched the topic to the investigation, and busily clarified what was wrong with him. Examining the documents, the magician came to the conclusion that the residual traces on the chimera would help find its owner. There was one problem, that the body was old. Myrna would be more difficult to get, the Archmage thought, and raised her hand to her lips. Finally, she said that it would take 3 months. Edgar became sad. In fact, he was counting on less. But that means he needs to spend these months usefully. The guys reasoned, rubbed their chins. 3 years ago, the captain studied everything. The coachman was killed somewhere in the wilderness without witnesses. It is still necessary to double-check everything again. Edgar gave the order, and there was already a volunteer who wanted to do this. Laurel volunteered for this case. She has a source, but she will tell about this later, whether they will trust her. She waited for an answer, raising her eyes. The girl was sitting in her room at the table. Next to her was that same box, and letters from her to another were scattered on the table. The pen skimmed over the paper, asking how the girl was doing. Today she wanted to tell you something. Laurel grabbed her head. Tears were coming. She wanted to write in the very first letter, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She decisively wrote about the accident when her parents could not escape, told everything, did not keep it to herself. I was grateful that I felt my parents alive again from the letters. I could not disturb this fleeting feeling, because I knew that it would be difficult to share with the girl afterwards. The female figure was hunched over the desk, this time having to write because she needed help. The letter is in her hands, she was thinking. They opened an investigation and they don't have enough evidence, so she asked her to tell about the criminal. Minutes of waiting passed. She folded her arms across her chest. Laurel chuckled. The girl usually answers quickly, and a squeak was heard. She rushed to the box and hurriedly opened it, screaming with excitement, quickly getting ready to take it out and start reading. With each line, the girl's eyes grew larger. Beads of sweat streamed down her face, and her face darkened. The father and Edgar said little. I read the letter. Almost nothing is known about the criminal. The only thing the girl found out for sure was that the criminal was in the Red Desert. It may not heal the wounds, but she accepted what was shared with her. It's worth a lot. It's not easy to bear such a burden. I wish Laurel knew something. She deserves to be loved. Her cheeks flushed at such a message. She knew this because she works hard and works. She wiped away the tears with her hand and lowered her head. This time she will definitely succeed. She will achieve it. She stood up, leaned on the table. She will find the culprit even if she has to risk everything. Edgar sat and read the documents. He could not allow the girl to go because one of the knights must remain to guard the palace. Laurel leaned against the table, raised her voice. Why can't a man stay? He's the same knight and the guard is also on him. She got up, touched her hair. The heroine was very angry, she said resentfully. She got this information. He didn't look at the captain, he said as he snapped, that this was dangerous for her. The Red Desert was dangerous for Laurel. The look changed. Her face darkened. The heroine understood everything from this phrase. She didn't like it. She was considered just a girl. Edgar realized what had just come out of his mouth and looked up in fear. Katie also looked up. Mincing every word so that it could be heard, Laurel expressed everything she was thinking, clenching her hands into fists. This reaction was familiar to the girl. She tried to prove to many that she had the right to be a marquise. The courtiers laughed at her. The sword was an adornment for a woman. And now Edgar made the same mistake. Although Laurel was confident in him that he understood her, his yellow eyes looked with resentment. She turned around, her hair flew up, offended. She understood and wished a happy journey to the captain. The man jumped up in his chair, tried to correct his mistake, but failed. The heroine did not listen to him. She purposefully went to the exit, carefully striding. He held the letterbox at arm's length. It was quite strange, the voice mused in the light of the moon. Belle, Laurel's brother, was worried. He kept looking at the box in his hands. She had not responded for quite a long time. Nana, the boy's childhood friend, suggested that his device was simply not fixed, and there was no reason to worry. He stopped behind the girl, confident in his device, waving his arms, proving that everything was in order, even installed magic stones, and they simply could not be broken. Then she's busy with the affairs of the knights, Nana responded, squinting her eyes to the side when she noticed that her friend was leaning towards her. A soft smile appeared on his lips, transforming his face. He will go home. They will definitely let him go. He screamed, covered his mouth with his friend's hand. He didn't want anyone to hear about his escape from the Tower of Magicians because they would be punished for this. The fugitives are recognized as traitors to noble magic, branded and hunted for the rest of their lives. Therefore, the young man shouted, a smile shining on his lips, he will have to be very careful in this matter. Nana stood up, leaned on the table, did not look at the guy, did not see anything good in her being left here alone. She snapped her finger. Sparks floated in different directions from the click. Becoming serious, the girl noticed that she would go with him. She looked back angrily. Apparently her friend had given away that Belle would die on the way to the Red Desert. Their cheeks turned red, but the smile did not disappear from their lips. This is great news. They are setting off now. A monster with a wide mouth and mouths on claws tried to attack the soldiers, uttered a piercing scream and twisted its body in different directions. Edgar asked skeptically, does anyone even live in this place, covered with a hood? Only his eyes sparkled. Katie explained that the desert is the best place for magicians. While healing the guy's wound, the more dangerous the place, the more people don't approach him. The team was exhausted, and the monsters kept attacking, and there was no end to them. The young men howled. There was also a storm ahead. Waving off the next monster, they will stop there and return to the village. The man gave the order. The tired guys exhaled. They had no strength left. Someone was sitting on the sand. Someone was leaning on a sword. They nodded in agreement. The index finger pointed to the side. They would not have to return to the village. Katie pointed to a house in the middle of the Red Desert, a small wooden one. They could spend the night there. Edgar waved it off. No rest, covering his face with a cloth, deep in thought, ready for battle. A large crowd of them approached the house, knocked on the door, asking if anyone was there. At first, it seemed that there was no one, but suddenly there was a crash and something flew out of the door. The soldiers scattered. Edgar and his men flew into the room, put out his sword, and were met by a hand that was about to use magic. The sharp blade touched the man's neck, leaving a cut, blood seeping through it. Everyone rushed towards the enemy. A warning rang in the air. Anyone who moves will immediately be killed. But the people in the room gave a surprise. They were amazed by the soldiers' attack, and their faces darkened. Edgar's face turned pale. He closed his eyes. Sweat dripped down his face and sincerely asked for forgiveness. The owners assured us that this happens, reassured us and offered us a snack, but the guys still felt uncomfortable. The woman was glad to see the guests. She also told about the owner of the chimera. She had heard this, but quite a long time ago, and put her fingers to her lips. A man and a woman looked at each other. In the Red Desert, you can love magicians and even give birth to children in secret. The couple held hands, blushed, laughed. They used to be magicians, but not now. The guys laughed. A fugitive is a fugitive. It became funny. Katie squinted her eyes at them. Edgar rested his hand on his cheek dreamily. Some people have problems expressing their true feelings. At this time, Laurel was sitting in her room, resting her cheek on her hand, wondering how the team was doing. She lay down on the table, spreading her arms on it, remembering the guy. She noted how upset he was. Her gaze fell on the box. Her eyes widened when she saw a flash and a message appeared there. The girl read something urgent and important because she flew out of the room like a bullet, calling her nanny as she walked to call the rider. The letter stated that the people responsible for the car incident were not ordinary talented magicians. They were powerful people behind the overthrow of the king. Laurel screamed, sweat running down her face, the knowledge that Sir Edgar was in danger forcing her to act quickly. The horseman galloped across the red desert, hurrying to help his friends. At the coronation of the prince, an uprising will begin. It will be the largest, and those who will sow death, their eyes widened, their teeth clenched. The girl saw a magician in front of her. The figure was completely flooded with a bright light that came out of his hands. This is the person who controlled the chimera. Edgar also tried to fight with the bright light. A trickle of blood flowed from the corner of his lips. The young man's clenched teeth and narrowed eyes betrayed his internal struggle for his strength. The guys were worried about their captain, but he interrupted their chatter. This was not the time to worry about him while fighting off the attack. Sweat was dripping down their faces. They would have to use all their strength to fight because they needed to return home alive. The monsters attacked and attacked more and more each time. The man fought off the monsters' heads, deftly working with his sword. The man, the owner of the hotel in the Red Desert, growled about killing these people. The woman agreed with her husband. The captain shouted, turned around, and gave the order for the archmage to prepare to open the portal, cutting the monster with his sword. A strange creature, a mixture of a bird, a dog, and a scorpion, stopped, stuck out its tongue. The owner showed thumbs up and was glad that everything was going well. The man spread his arms to the sides. He was wounded by a bright ray of light, caught unexpectedly and pierced from the back. Laurel came to his aid, covered him with her body, repelled the attack, the yellow light of her power emanating from her. The girl resolutely walked towards the monster, easily played with her sword in her hand, and slowly approached. Belle and Nana were also here and held their fists for their sister. The weakness of the chimera is the joints between her bodies. If you get to another place, regeneration will work. Listening to her brother's tips, the heroine actively worked with the sword, delivering precise blows to the clutches of the parts. The man was about to stop the girl. He had already raised his foot into this world. His wife supported him. Belle exclaimed in protest. He will not allow his sister to be offended. Nana suspected something and pointed her finger. The girl recognized this couple as Nyx and Ignis. The man and woman owners of the hotel in the Red Desert turned out to be not who they said they were. Having changed her appearance, acquiring her own features, the girl happily waved to the boy. They did not expect to see them here. Laurel, victorious and standing over the chimera, turned to Ignis and looked carefully. She smiled, waved her hand in which the red light came on, said goodbye to the character, but promised to see her again. The heroine stopped, followed her with her gaze. This strange couple managed to escape. The brother approached his sister and inquired about her well-being. Nana was treating Edgar, who was sitting on his knees, and a glow was coming out of his chest. Laurel ran up, worried about the young man, trying to find out how he was. The man felt awkward and leaned over, trying to apologize to the girl. The heroine was surprised and tried to calm her down. He bowed his head. This was not what the guy was apologizing for. He was sorry for the words he had said earlier about the woman and the desert. The girl was embarrassed. The words came out before she thought, causing a blush on the man's cheeks as well. The offer to go on a date with her shocked everyone. Ignis drooped. They almost succeeded. Anger was bubbling in this place. It was unknown where the magicians came from. They had a spy. They relied on him, their hands clasped tightly on the piece of the cane, betraying the one who was behind it all. The man bent over the lying man, his hands in a prayer gesture, his face darkened, his eyes downcast, mentally calling on everyone so that Edgar did not die. He closed his eyes, raised his hands to his mouth. A drop of sweat ran down his cheek, admitted that he couldn't live without him, and shared that the Archduke had been acting strange lately. The young man raised himself on his elbows, laughed at the prince, and behaved as if at a funeral. Cain jumped up, tears sparkled in his eyes. He was completely cured. He was happy and dumbfounded by this. Having laughed off, becoming serious, Edgar leaned closer to the prince. He was interested in the fact that the Archduke began to behave strangely. After thinking a little, the guy admitted that the strange thing was that he did nothing, isolated himself from everyone. Kane's eyes became sad. He remembered the situation 15 years ago and thought about it. Memories sparkled in the blue eyes of the young man, who had distanced himself in the same way before the incident when poison was used at the ball. Edgar put his hand on his shoulder and promised to take care of him and protect him, just as he did then. Kane laughed, nervously removing his hand, looking to the side and calling out to Eddie, laughing hysterically. She stopped with flowers in her hands near Laurel's door, covered her mouth with her hand, and apologized for disturbing their time. Afterwards, they sat opposite each other. The red heroine tried not to look at the guy and apologized again. The exchange of pleasantries went well. The questions were standard about how they were feeling, and only nervousness was revealed by the clenched hands on the knees of both the man and the woman. Edgar knew that if Laurel had not intervened, he would probably already be dead. She was embarrassed, looked, there is no need for gratitude, she was just lucky, on the way she met her brother. He turned away, remembered the girl's mention of a date, waved her hands in fear, and immediately changed the topic. She looked at her timidly, admitted that he stayed here on purpose. Knowing that perhaps the lady would visit him here, his face turned red. She looked at the flowers and answered hastily that it was reckless on her part to ask him out on a date. She reminded the man who he is, who she is, and hinted about their status. They would never be able to get married, and said with regret. She regretted her words, bowed her head, rested her hands on her knees, and apologized for her behavior. Edgar's next words made her raise her head. She looked at him in disbelief, pointing at himself. He can give up his title, then their relationship will have a chance. Then the chance will appear. Laurel will be courted. He approached the girl too close. His eyes sparkled. My eyes widened. I came up with a good plan and called him over instead of a date. Laurel met Eddie. He was standing in an embrace with flowers. She called to show him something. Belle was nearby. He held out a bouquet of flowers, although it was clear that the girl did not need flowers. She exclaimed enthusiastically when she accepted them. Belle folded his arms across his chest, stared menacingly at the couple. He was interested in the investigation, and they had gathered today for this, they confirmed in unison. To begin with, the guy pointed to a jewelry box, Eddie exclaimed in surprise. How could such a thing be unusual? But the young man opened it, showed the letter. With its help you can contact the parallel world, he explained. Laurel confirmed that this was true, so she called the man here and handed him a stack of letters. Edgar looked surprised, holding all these letters in his hands, did not understand what kind of worlds they were. It was unusual for him. It's hard to believe, but Belle confirmed that the magicians in the tower are studying parallel worlds and are looking for ways to contact them. The magician admitted that he was looking for the reasons why this box is connected to a parallel world. The man was surprised. The letter actually arrived. He began to read it. The girl wondered whether it was worth changing the future. The message still included a warning about the prince's birthday. I didn't want this horror to happen again. On that fateful night, many will die. The losses are too huge. Even Princess Michelle will die. And when the sun rises, the letter said, even more people will lose their lives during the execution, including Archduke Jan, who was the instigator of the uprising. The brother and sister cried out that it was all true. They saw that the man didn't really believe them. Laurel screamed. It was thanks to this box that she learned about the Red Desert and tried to reach out to the captain. Every word here is true. She clutched the letter in her hand. The heroine was angry. Her brother had already jumped up, looking at her in fear. She knew it sounded ridiculous. Her cheeks turned red, but she begged him to believe her this time and lowered her head. He raised his blue eyes to the girl. He believed her, even if she didn't say it. There would still be trust in her in his heart. He asked her to calm down. Her cheeks turned red. Even a drop of sweat appeared from embarrassment. She thanked her with a stutter. He continued calmly, saw Laurel sank into a chair, all red, with no evidence, having only letters. It's difficult to prove anything. All that remains is to continue to monitor the magicians. The girl looked timidly at the man and offered to train together until the prince's coronation. Edgar jumped up, clenched his fists. Now it was his turn to blush. Nodded in agreement. He wanted to suggest it himself. And while the couple interrupted each other in gratitude, Belle closed his eyes and reminded of his presence here. Princess Michelle had a lot of joy. Her wild imagination was already picturing Eddie and Laurel as they twirled in a passionate dance. The captain tried to stop the princess, but she seemed not to hear her, wrapped her arms around herself and danced. Laurel and Katie continued to drink tea when Michelle jumped up to them. She raised her voice, asking that they now need to be fully prepared. The princess could no longer calm down. She imagined what would happen during the training, what lines these people would have. She clasped her hands together and was touched, because as a result of such training, perhaps a man would touch his heart. Michelle touched her face with her finger, tried to explain about touching, and gave examples. During training, touching the guy, she felt heat, looked in surprise, did not answer questions, and froze. Suddenly, Edgar was brought out of his thoughts. He knocked over the girl, screaming loudly. She rubbed herself and did not expect this from him. She looked back and saw that they were attacked by that same light magician with a monster. He was looking for Laurel's brother. The heroine rushed to repel the monster's attack, narrowing her eyes and gritting her teeth. This was difficult. This time, Nex controlled an even larger creature, sat on its back and commanded it, madness splashing in the hasty gestures of its body. The couple fought back as best they could, deftly fighting back with swords. But the chimera could not be harmed even by a joint attack. Eddie shouted about his excellent regeneration. A scream was heard from the threshold. It was the old nanny who came out into the street and saw the creature, screamed loudly, clasping her hands to her chest. The woman recoiled in fear. Her eyes widened, because one of the heads of the chimera was flying straight at her, its mouth open. Laurel jumped up, put up her sword, and repelled the monster's attack. The nanny closed her eyes, already saying goodbye to her life, tears flowing from the corners of her eyes. She turned to the woman, touched her shoulder, screamed in confusion that she had forgotten there. She needed to run away with Belle and the others. I heard that my brother was missing. Nana conveyed the message, her eyes turned red, and next exclaimed in surprise on the monster. The man's crazy look did not bode well. He was offended by the way the girl treated the chimera. While she was talking with the nanny, the girl did not notice the clawed paw flying at her. She turned around too late. A man's screams were heard. Everything started spinning. Screams and an incomprehensible noise were mixed. Everything also stopped abruptly. The girl's hand fell to the ground. There was a clawed paw on top and blood. While Nex looked down at his prey, reasoning that he had managed it without the guy. It was too easy. Edgar was flying on top of him with a sword in his hands. The guy ended up with the heroine, sat down, supporting her, holding her hand, worried about his brother. The young man gritted his teeth. His creation was attacked again. He became angry with the captain, and the chimera also howled. Edgar did not listen to Nex's screams. He began to attack, deftly dodging the heads of the creature. The target was the boy. The man shouted loudly and gave commands to his beast, was angry that he was dodging, and was already shouting without holding back his emotions. Laurel knew that when an enemy is enraged, gaps appear in his body. The man was focused on Edgard, so the opportunity arose. The training was not in vain, and the heroine remembered that she could dissolve her aura around the sword and it would be easy to control it, which she did. She delivered the decisive blow and Nex flew off the chimera. The beast itself fell. They succeeded. The enemy fell. The guy's body trembled. He stared in shock at the legs approaching him, touched his chest. This is the best creation. Defeated. Laurel was interested in where her brother, without restraining himself, grabbed the throat, hovered over the enemy. Nex began to cry. Tears rolled down from his eyes, shouting that he didn't know, he sincerely didn't know he forced him. The girl turned pale, guessed that this man was to blame for everything. He killed her parents. Large tears gathered in her eyes. He screamed in fear and backed away. The boy was only obeying orders, replacing his parents' horse. The tear found a way out, flowed like a stream, grabbed the sword tightly, whispered. She was ready to kill him and was determined. There was a bang and the place was filled with red. The girl saw that the guy was missing. She gritted her teeth. He was no longer there. Eddie ran up anxiously asking how she was. He approached from behind, carefully grabbed her sword, asked her to let go. He needed to examine her hand. The Archduke was happy. Everyone was assembled today. His happiness knew no bounds. He showed the reason for his good mood. Belfort was locked in the mirror and floated there unconscious. He squinted his eyes rather. The smile never left his lips and wanted to introduce a person who deserves special praise. Master Katie surprisingly appeared before everyone as this person. The girl looked around at everyone. The Archduke folded his hands on his chest. With this, he said, the meeting was over. Gradually, the people present began to disappear in the mirror windows. He exhaled, folded his hands on the cane, bowed his head as if this meeting was very difficult for him. Next screamed it was not his fault. He blamed the Archduke for his confidence being just nonsense. Ignis listened, with her hands folded and her eyes closed, and the guy tried to justify himself, waving his hands. He believed that that couple was too strong. But the girl raised her head. She scolded next. He forgot what happened 15 years ago and turned sharply towards him. The guy jumped up to the girl, grabbed her hands, apologized in fear, looked at him calmly, and waited for the hysteria to end. She lightly lifted the young man's chin with her finger. It is worth remembering only one goal, only one thing. They will begin to live without magic. The only important thing is the time when they can leave the Red Desert and live with their heads held high, holding their child in their arms. Katie quietly approached. Now she won't turn away. Otherwise, as soon as they gather power, there is no turning back. The confrontation between the girls dragged on. They argued without raising their voices about who caught Belle and how they distinguished themselves. The Archduke distracted himself from this squabble. He was interested in the further plan. He would like to know from Katie. In 3 days, the magician will cast a bait that Belle's tracks lead to the Red Desert, and will watch what Laurel does. The piercing gaze of cold eyes stopped the speech in the office. The last warning, no more concessions will be made, was spoken quietly but audibly. Laurel stared in shock, heard that the girl knew where Belle was, impatience in her eyes. The heroine jumped up. Everyone remained sitting at the table, but Katie was not sure. She played skillfully. No one had any idea what the magician was hiding. Once it became known about the Red Desert, and Belle was possibly there, Laurel firmly told Laurel that she would go there. Eddie's attempt to intervene was unsuccessful. He nodded in agreement. He wanted to go with the girl because those magicians are quite strong, the Archmage interrupted. Someone must stay behind to protect the palace. The character beamed, raised her eyes, and assured the man that everything would be fine and she would cope. She closed her eyes. Katie will report to His Majesty, collected the papers, and that's it. The magician entered her office with a knock, exhaled, leaned her hands on the table, and leaned over. The meeting took too much energy. She turned to the mirror. A man was already waiting for her. She reported to him how long it would take for the captain to leave for the desert, did not look at him, and lowered her eyes. Something was wrong. She stopped herself mid-sentence, called his lordship, but the Archduke was silent. Laurel was reflected in the mirror. She guessed that Master Katie was a spy, which she proved. A detachment led by Edgar burst into the office. Prince Cain could not contain his emotions, and admired the fact that they managed to pull off the operation. Nana admitted that Archmage Katie behaved very carelessly. The prince agreed. A blue glow appeared on the floor under the princess's feet. The magical formation was quite powerful. It couldn't escape anywhere. The sword almost touched the girl's throat. She gritted her teeth and sparkled her eyes with hopelessness. It was Edgar who extended his hand with a sword. He proposed a deal, and the life of Princess Katie was at stake. Laurel approached slowly. Her sword also rushed to the girl's throat. Anger seized her. The captain asked loudly and clearly about her brother. The girl's hand would not waver if necessary to deliver a fatal blow. A few days earlier, Prince Cain bit his index finger as he pondered the man's words. That's when Laurel said about Katie's betrayal. Of course there was doubt, but her intuition told her. Remembering his training, because then Belle should have been with them, but he went to meet Nana. Only the Archmage and Princess Michelle knew about the training. Eddie shook the letter. In it, the girl was a victim, so she did not participate in the conspiracy. Nana nodded. The magical trace, although weak, was precisely the magician. And besides, everyone remembered that the Archduke insisted on participating. He covered his mouth with his hand. The prince understood that Michelle could die at the coronation. The letter said so. The changes in Cain could be seen. He immediately became serious and gave orders to check the mirror. It was surprising to hear about the shadows of the Ministry of Magic. The prince turned around and gave Eddie a smile. Now Laurel was trying to find out where her brother was, but Katie calmed her down, assuring her that she didn't kill Belle and there was no need to worry. The magician frowned and tried to find out what would happen to her sister, but the sharp sword silenced her. The two captains pointed their swords, pressed a little, reminded the girl of her position, not to dictate terms to her. She stretched out her hand. Katie's wrist glowed red. She had no choice. She had to open up. The boy appeared, as if in a mirror, unconscious. Laurel screamed, shocked by what she saw. Belle fell straight onto the floor. Nana ran up to him, touching him, and his sister also ran to find out how he was. Katie was left alone. She fell to the floor, holding her hand to her heart. She was wondering about her sister. If Michelle was okay, she asked to tell her. Laurel stood up and hovered over the princess, and loudly replied that she would not be the one who would kill Michelle if the girl had not already realized this. She threw a letter at the feet of the arch-magician. "This will happen at the coronation of the prince," the girl said. Princess Katie shook all over, read the letter, not believing her eyes. Prince Cain stopped next to her. The captain showed the box in her hand and explained, pursing her lips, that Belfort had provided this item. They know everything about the plans of their group, so it's worth thinking about whose side to take at the very moment. Katie burst out. She talked and talked about why she was doing all this, that her name was nothing other than a princess. Although she was an arch-magician, she was not recognized with dignity, and she was also upset that Michelle's husband did not pay attention. Tears streamed down her cheeks, crushing the letter in her hands. The girl sobbed. They were nothing more than hostages. Not everyone knew the truth. Jan promised to achieve recognition of their rights. Edgar could not stand it and shouted that under no circumstances could the Archduke be trusted. "Reminded me of an unpleasant situation 15 years ago and who was sacrificed on the estate." Prince Cain knelt down on one knee next to the bowed Katie, apologized, and rethought everything he had said. The man did not know what the girls had gone through, apologized, and asked permission to correct his mistakes. Laurel and Edgar returned, smiling and egging each other on, the warm communication mesmerizing the couple. Suddenly becoming serious, the man was worried about the girl and apologized for not finding his brother quickly. She turned to the guy. If she sincerely empathizes, then let him accompany her to the coronation of the prince, she asked. And then she waved her hands, got embarrassed. If he has a pair, then it's not worth it. She tried to justify herself by saying that it was too suspicious to go without a pair. Edgar remained silent all this time, sharply leaned forward and embraced Laurel in a tight hug. In the rays of the setting sun, these two stood in an embrace on the path. The man could not allow her to go alone. Katie gave Michelle instructions on what to wear and take with her. She should be careful. During the tea ceremony, the girls said goodbye. The magician promised to return before the coronation of the prince. Cain handed the princess a handkerchief and explained that the arch-magician would go to the tower with Nana. The girl had great potential. He complimented the girl. He liked it when she smiled. It was much better than tears. These words made the girl's cheeks red. Cain turned away, embarrassed, and it became awkward at the table. The prince burst out laughing, turned with the cup to Michelle. The heat burned his cheeks, but he remembered a funny story and wanted to tell it. Katie immediately understood who it was about. They turned to the archmage in surprise. They didn't know how she knew everything. The princess was delighted that the captain was caring for Laurel. The guy nodded, extended his hand, admitted that there was a group that was helping to create conditions for Eddie, folded his palms, and Michelle was happy for such care. He lowered his head, his face darkened, and admitted that now X Club was collapsing, but the princess put forward an idea and thoughtfully clarified with him. Cain beamed and turned to her joyfully when he heard that he could invite her people from the 2nd Battalion and find out better about the girl. Katie, who had been sitting silently before, could not stand it and laughed. She watched the relationship between the prince and princess. She laughed it off, apologized, and explained to the stunned couple that she saw her sister was safe, and Her Highness would protect her to the end. Edgar bowed his head thoughtfully. He walked in the pouring rain under an umbrella, toiling with anticipation. In a formal suit with an umbrella, she was in a hurry to see the guy, worried that she had stayed too long. He looked at her timidly, only came up and complimented the captain, his cheeks turning red. 2 people stood near the gate, lowered their eyes, and did not look at each other. They were shy, but praised their appearance. The girl folded her umbrella. It was time for them to go. Edgar was surprised by this, gave in to her. The rain had not stopped. He jumped up, covered him with his umbrella, hugged him by the waist, and leaned over a little. It happened spontaneously and quickly. The captain did not think about his actions. Two people walked down the street under one umbrella. The rain enveloped their figures, enjoying each other's company in such weather. This evening was just wonderful. There were a lot of emotions and impressions that they will remember for a long time. The heroine liked the evening, so she wanted to continue and waited where they would go next. The young man was embarrassed and asked permission to buy her a dress because they were going to the ceremony together and there would be a gift. They were greeted in the salon very pompously. Firecrackers were launched, whistles were blown, and the smile never left the faces of those greeting them. Because it was too loud, Laurel pulled out her sword and touched the woman. Her face darkened. This is a reaction to the sound. After an apology, the situation became clearer. The couple sat down on the sofa and began to listen to the owner of the stitch salon. The plump woman pointed to herself, proud that the captain had already ordered a dress for the girl, and looked at the man in surprise. The hostess talked about how the dress shouldn't hinder movement. The material was high quality. He leaned towards Eddie's ear and said that the dress was specially made for combat. The woman intervened in their conversation, offered to try on a dress. It was interesting. Laurel was embarrassed. When the character went to the fitting, Edgar was nervous. The hostess noticed this, calmed him down, and asked him to turn the book over. The woman just wanted to give a couple of lessons on how to behave when the marquise comes out, but she didn't have time. The assistant girls notified her that she was ready. The man's mouth opened slightly. His blue eyes opened. He seemed not to be breathing. A blush appeared on his cheeks. Embarrassed, Laurel looked out, already dressed in a dress. The blue color suited the girl perfectly. The young man, all red and stammering, told Madame that everyone should go out and leave them alone. Everyone hurried to leave the room. A woman remained behind to suggest that if something happened, the hem of the dress could be torn off. The heel will be more stable, the madam continued. Laurel suggested that she collect her hair so that it would be easier to fight, and assured that they would add armor. Edgar could not restrain himself. He raised the girl's hand and kissed it, closing his eyes. Very beautiful, excellent work of tailors. Two guys looked out from behind the tall bushes, clenched their fists, and were angry. They did not understand why they should watch their own captain. Hidden, they discussed the fact that Edgar was in love with Laurel. This unexpectedly came to them. The discussion flared up at breakneck speed, each guy praising his captain, and the conversation touched on the status of each of them. One of them exclaimed that he would not allow anything irreparable to happen, raised his hand, and suggested changing the purpose of the operation. Suddenly, the elder approached and took him by surprise. The guys huddled close to each other and immediately went back on their words. The men began to argue. They didn't know what would happen if the captain got married. Laurel appeared from behind, and she was also curious what would happen. She folded her hands on her chest and waited for an answer. The girl was angry. She pierced everyone who was here with her gaze, and asked again about the wedding that she herself didn't know about. Edgar was waiting for the heroine. She was delayed, although she herself suggested training in the same place. Her last words. Laurel came running, but she was not alone. But with a tied-up man, the captain's question remained on her lips. She showed small magical inserts in her hands and asked Eddie if he knew that some of his people and His Highness wore such things. The girl angrily asked the man. He raised his hand to his face, shook his head, closed his eyes, he guessed, but the captain would not like the answer. Laurel began to talk about the prince's distrust, and Edgar began to talk about his feelings. The two of them started the conversation and also stopped together. They suddenly fell silent and stared eye to eye. Their cheeks turned red. The wind ruffled their clothes, but they didn't pay attention to anything. The heroine quickly turned around and was about to leave. Without turning around, she said that they were postponing the training. She wanted to leave as quickly as possible. Eddie grabbed the girl's wrist tightly, asking her to stay. Delaying her, it was necessary to clarify everything. He clasped her hand with his. If not now, then he doesn't know when there will be time for an explanation. He kissed his hand, closed his eyes, hoped that he would see in him not only the Duke or the captain of the 1st Battalion, but something more. He would try. He bent down, hope burning in his eyes, asking him to look, begging her because caring for her was paramount. He turned away and admitted that he had liked the team for a long time. They had found out about him, so they were setting up such cases. He confessed and spoke about His Majesty's club, lowered his head and called him the love of the Duke and the Marquise. Becoming serious, he put his hand to his chest and asked directly whether the heroine would accept his feelings. The captain noticed that the girl had doubts. He continued sternly. It was not a proposal, but the guy did not finish his speech. She bowed her head, so she was tired of the time, muttered, and was about to run away. Think about the Duke's words. The heroine ran away, turned around, waved her hand. Her face was all red, too awkward. Thanked him. She ran into the office, closed the door, sat down next to her, exhaled. Too much had fallen on her. The image of the captain popped up in her head. She pushed it away, but she had never seen a man so beautiful. Guys from her battalion appeared at the door. They were worried. They saw her running away. They assumed that she had somehow offended the club. When they burst into the office, the girl was already standing near the table, folded her arms on her chest, calm. Laurel realized that the men knew about the club and were silent, and began to swear at them, offended that they did not warn. The girls tried to calm the fire, saying that Prince Cain ordered them. They could lose their knighthoods. They ran up to their captain and assured that they had created a counter-club to the LGM club against Laurel's marriage. If the heroine gets married, then the entire empire will lose its best knight. She was taken aback by such a statement. They couldn't help but agree that Edgar would be a good husband, but they couldn't lose Laurel, who would then lead them. She laughed out loud until there were tears in her eyes. It was nice for the character to hear it, an honor for her. She held the box in her hand. It was time to receive the letter, and she sent the surprised guys back. The box clinked, and a letter appeared. The girl asked about a date and immediately corrected herself that it was not a date. That other Laurel hoped that her marriage would be for love, and in fact, it happened. Maybe they will work out something. She covered herself with her hands, didn't know what to do. She really wanted to see the Duke. She was burning with desire. She seemed to understand something. She hurried to Sir Edgar, ran and did not look around. She was in a hurry to the man who had become dear. Edgar was working out in the yard, furiously swinging his sword, throwing out his pain from today's date. Laurel ran across the yard, shouting Eddie's name, surprised at her appearance, and watched as the girl hurried. Not allowing the man to utter a word, she hung on his neck, buried her face. A blush appeared on her cheeks, incomprehensibly grabbed her waist, hoping that he would notice her. She grabbed him tightly with her arms, thanked him, went straight to him. Edgar was confused. She began to speak hurriedly. When she first learned about the parallel world, she envied her other self. She explained that there, in another world, the heroine's parents were alive. They did not despise her. Her life was like that of a real duchess. The girl considered herself unhappy, compared to the other one, and pressed herself closer to the man. She pulled back, looked straight into her eyes. This investigation made me look at the whole situation with different eyes and change my mind. Her parents are no longer here, but her boys are supportive, and the prince and princess valued her like a knight. She happily finished that the guy sees in her not only a fragile girl or a knight, he was able to see the real her. He surrounded me with care and kindness. I didn't notice it. A smile lit up my face. I found an approach. She apologized for running away. Now she's ready to answer the guy's question and also worry about him. She gave in to him, touched his hand, smiled, received a smile in return. They were silent and just watched. He closed his eyes, lightly touched her cheek with a kiss. Everything was as it should have been. She was calm next to him. They apologized to each other for being rude, grabbed each other by the waist, pressed them to themselves. Their lips met. Pleasure poured through the veins. A couple walked down the street, holding hands and smiling. Love surrounded them lightly and weightlessly. He cleared his throat, raised his hand to his lips, and suggested that in private they call each other something else. More tenderly, that would be only for the two of them. He continued to move, but got lost in thought, did not remove his hand from his chin, went through several addresses and said that he would call Leah. It had been too long since anyone had called her that. She was confused and blushed, and when she brought her face closer and wanted to know what she would call him, she turned completely pale. So they continued to go through the appeal. Plans for tomorrow. Unnoticed, they found themselves near the gate. They came. They said goodbye, promised to see each other tomorrow, kissed them, hugged them by the hands, and their cheeks turned red. The next morning, they were busy getting ready for the meeting when Edgar's mother wanted to talk to him seriously. Laurel showed off in front of the mirror, straightened her hair, put on makeup, a happy smile never left her lips. But after waiting for the man all day, standing by the window, it was already sunset. No one came to her. She realized that something had happened. In a large, half-empty room where there were only mirrors, Ian was deciding exactly how to change tactics, because all their intelligence had leaked. The Archduke closed his eyes and exhaled. Despite the fact that Katie had disappeared, they were still holding on. A man was shouting at him from the mirror. Unable to withstand the attacks, the young man spun around and struck, breaking the mirror. He spoke angrily, looked around. There was fear on the faces of those gathered. Ian didn't like how they would carry out their plan. He expressed everything that could relieve the anxiety of those in the mirror, but did not leave alone the thought that the plans might become known. The Archduke deftly got out of it, offered to throw bait. They would easily swallow it, and assured everything would be fine. In any case, they have a trump card up their sleeve that they can use, turn around, and throw it to continue their work. Yang sat down, grabbed his head, wondered where the princess could have gone, next suggested that there was only one place. Ignis knew that this woman was in the magic tower. Accordingly, she entered into an alliance with the crown prince. The guy was indignant and succumbed to the girl. She believed that Katie was being helped only because she was a magician. There was no other reason. Everything in this world depended on magic, and she was indignant. Next took off his gloves and wanted to touch his beloved, but she abruptly removed her hand, reminded him of the Mina, jumped up and was angry because of the guy's self-will. Rubbing her hands, Ignis noticed that it was impossible to behave so carelessly. Ian began to pull out his sword. He extended his hand with the sword across the table. The tip touched the young man's throat and said his name in warning. He reminded him that his patience would not last forever. The girl screamed, jumped up from her seat, and was very scared. He raised his hand with the sword, darkened his face, called the guy a non-entity. Because even the girl overpowered him, anger took over him. Ignis prevented the murder from being committed, covered next with herself, and said hastily that they still needed him. Finally, the man lowered his sword and gave in to the girl's arguments, because they would still need the chimera. The Archduke was leaving, but turned around just before the door. Ignis would lose his head if he failed. The promise hung in the air. Words of gratitude flew out of Nek's lips, but the girl turned to him and slapped him resoundingly in the face, leaving a mark from her palm. I didn't want to date a weakling. I needed to try harder. A red spot burned on my cheek. Tears stood in the young man's eyes. Laurel was leaning against the door, unable to open it. She leaned over. There was no one in the area. Plucking up courage, she finally pushed the door open and entered, asking the captain for a minute. "We need to talk." Edgar sat at the table without raising his head, asked what brought her here. The heroine was confused but replied that she would like to know why she came yesterday. I tried to call the man for a long time, but after a while he answered. He wasn't feeling well. I tried to find out how he was feeling, but he stopped mid-sentence. Still without raising his head, he besieged the heroine. They'll talk a little later. Now he's very busy. Laurel froze. She couldn't help but move or utter a word. She quietly whispered that she found out about the dress, and it was ready. The guy didn't react at all. Laurel's hand clenched. She made an attempt to invite her somewhere again, wrapped her arm around herself, and felt awkward. She cleared her throat, admitted that she was behaving rudely because Edgar had something to do, and she was in the way, closed his eyes, and lowered the sheet of paper. She turned around and could go to the salon herself. Tears appeared in her eyes. She could hardly hold them back. She didn't want to burst into tears in front of the man. She slammed the door. Eddie was left alone, his hand clenched on the piece of paper. He growled without holding back his emotions. I remembered a conversation with my mother, when I listened in surprise to how my mother said that kinship with the devils is impossible. When he heard that they were enemies, a drop of sweat ran down his cheek. His face darkened. The young man's father was involved in the situation with the carriage. He squeezed his hand on his chest, couldn't believe what he heard. Father. His eyes widened, his mouth parted. Anna didn't know all the details, lowered her head, exhaled. 3 years ago, her father supported the Archduke in his impulse to change power. Then the Ministry of Magic was only increasing its power. Then it realized that the Marquis, who had maintained neutrality, sided with Prince Cain. He was planning a murder. Edgar's father was aware, but did not intervene, did not warn, although he knew about everything. Tears streamed down his cheeks. The guy's body trembled, his fist clenched. He understood the reason why he refused the title. From a feeling of guilt, the woman looked away. He screamed loudly, without restraining himself. The father should have asked for forgiveness, answered according to the law for his crimes, but only Edgar thought so. He covered his face with a trembling hand, remembered the girl's pleasant words, and immediately imagined her with tears in his eyes. The heroine was greeted at the stitch salon with joyful laughter and smiles from the madam and assistants. The last time the meeting did not work out. The girls made a noise, were surprised that she was alone today, tried to protect the guy, he was working, but they stood their ground, considering it rude. Laurel laughed. It was nice to have such concern. She asked me to look at the new outfits. There was a visitor trying on a dress, and Madame folded her hands in a praying gesture. And there was something to see. The stitch salon was the best in the city. There were many dresses, and they were all amazing, shimmering and sparkling. The woman started talking about the Duke's outfit. It was beautiful. She winked at her. Everything was repeated. I noticed that the girl was being offered outfits, but she chose a red dress, laughed, and timidly answered Madame's questions. She thought that they always give such names in this salon. The girl distracted her and asked if she needed a mirror. Suddenly, I recognized Ignis in this girl. She was posing and mocking Laurel, laughing, knowing that nothing would happen to her. Taking out the sword, she asked what the sorceress was doing here. Her yellow eyes sparkled, anger wanted to come out. She exhaled. Ignis spread her arms, didn't see anything wrong with it. She just wanted to buy a dress. She put the sword back because if a massacre starts, people will suffer. The captain didn't want that. She turned round and was about to leave, decided to end it there, and warned Ignis next time. But she heard the girl easily discussing her parents, including the Duke. Her eye twitched. Laurel couldn't just leave. She turned to Madame and asked to vacate the room for a few minutes. She needed to talk. Ignis laughed it off. What was said hurt the girl. Without showing her fear, she waved her arms and continued to hurt the captain. Then she pulled out the sword and buried the tip in the sorceress's throat. But the girl defended the honor and dignity of the royal family. But she put away the sword, bowed her head. Later, she would punish her later, because she understood that she was only a pawn in this game. Yellow eyes stared at Ignis. She said that she learned something here. There was no smile. She told me about the interesting rumors that are circulating about a girl in the Empire, Ignis Portia. The renegade, who was saved by the magic tower, left her for her lover. The captain spoke a lot about her. They even created the image that the girl was an unhappy witch in love, lowered her head and darkened her face. Ignis raised her head. A flame was already burning in her hands. Let her not think that she was special. Her role was no better. She screamed, pointing her finger at Laurel. They only respect her because of her stupid aura. She couldn't restrain herself. She didn't achieve anything on her own. There was a loud explosion at the front door. The captain looked around. Someone was breaking in. The interior was filled with blue. Edgar entered the room, all sparkling with his strength. The sword was already ready, fierce, self-confident. Ignis, shut up. You can't talk about a girl like that. She's not like that. I wondered what brought the guy here, but did not answer, or later, while he wants to deal with the witch. Ignis became angry at the man's words. Without raising her head, the power was heating up around her. The words came out with a grinding sound, as if not a girl, but an old woman. Heavy words flew into Laurel. Power enveloped her. They were similar, two auras. Power flew into the captain. There was an explosion. Everything turned red, shaking the girl. The heroine clenched her teeth, swung her sword, and fought back the force that surged through her. None of the girls noticed the guy. Therefore, it was a complete surprise when Sir Edgar pushed away the force, touching Laurel's sword with his hand. Everything around lit up. Drops of sweat flowed down the man's face. The captain was worried about him, but assured him that everything was fine with him and continued the attack. Shrouded in flames, Ignis thought everything was too simple. She didn't understand why Nex couldn't cope with it himself. It was too arrogant to think so. The villainess did not understand what was happening to her power, snapped her fingers, decided to say goodbye to Laurel. They would meet again ahead. The sorceress disappeared with the words to prepare better for the next meeting, and they were left alone in the middle of the hall. The girl's brother burst into the room, screaming in fear and worried about his well-being. The guy was very sorry that he didn't find the girl here because he knew her too. His sister's hand touched his cheek. She jumped on his neck, hugged him tightly. Tears appeared in her eyes. She was glad that her brother was already feeling better. Nana and Eddie smiled. They heard the girl perfectly well, her words that she was now protecting her brother. Laurel pestered the captain, asked about his well-being, strongly recommended going to the hospital. The man walked stubbornly and answered without emotion. She turned around, caught the guy's gaze, asked him not to expose himself to attack for her sake, said timidly, and was very worried. Edgar looked at Leah, smiled. It seemed like he wouldn't be able to push her away. There was warmth in his eyes. Love surrounded the couple. Joking, they continued on their way. The man stopped, pointed at himself, and asked him to promise that he would not get hurt again. Eddie lamented and regretted that he didn't go straight to the salon, but Laurel raised her head and came anyway. He hugged her tightly, pressed his whole body against her, apologized for pushing her away and acting rudely. She raised her shining eyes to the guy. It's not scary. She will accept any excuse. She has already accepted the apology. He is dear to her. Hands met, he would wait until he was ready to tell everything. The captain confirmed that he would definitely tell everything. Ignis was angry, clenched her hands into fists, muttered obscene words. Next jumped up, did not understand what was happening. He noticed that there was blood on her hand, screamed and carefully extended his hand, not daring to touch it. But the girl pulled back her hand, screamed sharply, and reminded her that she had already spoken about touching. Her face darkened, she turned to face him and began to accuse him of being to blame. It would be easier to deal with one of them now. Next suggested just leaving this revenge and just being lost together. Living is all he wanted. She turned her face full of tears. She didn't want to give up because they had deprived her of everything. She couldn't just give up. Ignis could not refuse this. Tears flowed down her cheeks. She took off her glove, touched her palm to the man's. She would rather refuse him. Tears streamed from Neck's eyes when he realized what his beloved was doing. The guy exhaled, confirmed that he sees everything correctly. Her strength does not disappear even when they hold hands, and whispered about her dislike for him. Nex was always offended, teased and beaten, called a little rat because he made strange creatures. The guys laughed, pestered Next on purpose, trying to get him to cry, held his animal, they found it funny and having fun. Suddenly, their hands became hot. They could not hold the crow in their hands and dropped it. The young man looked at it with his mouth open. They realized that it was the girl with magic. They squinted at her. Ignis stood and played with the flame in her hands, looked and grinned at the men. She survived only because the tower saved her. They began to reprimand her, holding her hand. Her father poured poison. The girl was also embarrassed by the fact that she stared at them and did not take her eyes off. The young people shouted impudently. The guys left, did not want to stay in the same room with her. Those remaining in the room looked at each other, but remained silent. Ignis picked up the crow, handed it to Next. He must take care of his animal, and straightened up. She sat down next to her, hugged her knees. It was better to kill such people than to give them a dear creature for slaughter. And now the girl was just leaving. The guy tried to stop her, extended his hands, did not understand where she was going. Tears rolled down the man's cheeks. He fell to his knees, asking that he would fix everything, that he would definitely solve everything. Ignis turned around. Now there is nothing in her heart except revenge. No one is to blame. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Kane looked at the document about his allies, did not expect that there would be so many. He looked surprised. He looked up at his knights, asked about their combat power, and Edgar began to reason. Laurel confirmed that it would be too suspicious if the guards were increased. Yang would know and understand that there would be soldiers in the vanguard. The prince thanked and praised. There is little time left. You need to be careful. Belle looked in surprise. He leaned over, whispered that an uprising was about to happen, and warned that they would not be the first to attack. The boy was worried about something. He decided to share something with him. If the previous Viscount was persecuted, then how Ignis united with the Archduke. The prince closed one eye and tried to explain the reason for their union, which could not yet be called strong. Laurel and Edgar's eyes met. Kane shared a lot of interesting things in this story. On his birthday 15 years ago, the previous Archduke personally prepared the poison with which he was poisoned. Jean's father was holding a small bottle of poison in his hands. A couple of drops would be enough to kill a person. He warned that exactly 2 drops were needed, otherwise he would kill the crown prince and bring suspicion upon himself. Viscount Portia, Ignace's father, accepted the bottle. He knew that the king was friendly towards him, so nothing would happen. A little girl witnessed everything. It was Laurel. She hid behind a ledge of the wall and watched the men. The man suspected something, stopped the other's speech with a gesture, and headed towards the girl. The whole body of the child in the yellow dress trembled. She closed her eyes tightly, and the boy saw her through the window. The boy opened the window, crawled towards the girl. The sunset illuminated him. His face was not visible. They grabbed hands and made it in time. Just as the men turned the corner, the girl fell and her skirts flew up. Little Edgar saved Laurel then. Although he was scared himself, he was still able to help. Droplets of sweat rolled down his cheeks. The children knew each other. Eddie immediately turned away and muttered at Laurel, "We need to move on. We won't be able to escape." I looked at the closed door. There was a man knocking on it, threateningly scolding the boy. But the child remained calm. And while they were breaking in the doors, the children needed to quickly go down the tree. Edgar had already begun to do this, but the girl hesitated. It took a little time, and Laurel took out her brother's invention, an aero umbrella, especially for those who like to climb trees. The children looked back at the men, who called them and promised not to do anything, but the children were already standing on the railing, about to fly off. A joyful, evil grin appeared on the Viscount's lips. He caught and was now holding someone with his hands. The children were grabbed and tied up while the man examined Belle's handiwork, recognizing his innate ability. They looked at the children, wondered what to do with them, but decided not to touch them for now. Prince Cain would be removed, then they would no longer be needed. The Viscount looked piercingly. They will serve his son when he becomes crown prince, he promised. Magicians are needed to erase the memories. They left the children in the room, went to the banquet themselves, and they will be watching this couple already there. Little Cain was in a large hall among people. They greeted him and rejoiced at his arrival. His Highness noticed that something was wrong with the Viscount of Portia, but the man assured that everything was fine and in turn brought congratulations. He showed me a bottle, brought it especially for them, a delicious drink for this event. He couldn't miss it. Cain's eyes opened. The boy cried out, "They know this drink, they talked about it." The man laughed, "Enough only for His Highness," he answered with regret, and a wine glass appeared in his other hand. He presented it to the prince. The boy's father joked, smiled joyfully. Cain was looking forward to when he could finally try it. The prince took the wineglass in his hands, was already bringing the clear liquid to his mouth, and the Viscount was also egging him on. The boy paused, turned to his father, and called him. The glass was extended. His fate was sealed. The prince wanted to share it with Gen, with the same man who handed over the poison. He shuddered. His piercing gaze did not leave the wineglass. And although the boy made timid attempts to not allow him to drink, he grinned and assured that there was nothing wrong with it. He lowered his eyes, a drop of sweat rolled down his cheek, and his father's hand clenched on his shoulder. He heard the child calming and trying to protect his voice. Cain tried to insist. He wanted to share the drink, but the Viscount rather rudely gave advice that he shouldn't share if he didn't want to offend the giver. The liquid has almost touched the lips of the little boy. He has almost taken a sip, just a little, and there will be no turning back. A voice came from the door, which announced the poison in the wine glass. A thin child's hand clasped the door frame, and there were rope marks on his wrist. He stared dumbfounded at the speaker, opened his mouth slightly, put away the wine glass. His Highness was no less surprised. Edgar opened the doors. His whole face was wet. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, shouting about the poisoned wine and that he couldn't drink it. The children, left alone in the room, whispered. Eddie was worried about the girl. She had tears in her eyes. The heat scorched her cheeks. The boy reassured Laurel, "It's not scary. They will just erase part of the memories." His calmness was transferred to her. Edgar was now more worried about the prince, because he was in danger, so he tried to free his hands. This is what subjects of the Empire do. They were like brothers. He gritted his teeth. It was his duty to protect. Tears rolled down from powerlessness. He gave many reasons to get out. While he was groaning and trying to find something that would help untie his hands, the girl screamed that he needed to come to her. She explained that her father was the commander of a battalion of knights. She must always stand up for herself. There were no more tears. When the boy turned around, she began to gnaw the rope with her teeth. The determination in her gaze made her realize that the girl had grown up dramatically. Eddie's hands were free. He happily showed her, exhaled. I remembered my father's trick well. We stopped near the door. It turned out to be locked. Again the girl began to fuss, hissing and swearing. It only took a second. She pulled out the ring, found it. If the child was lost and couldn't get out, the boy interrupted her, holding her with his hand, asking her to slow down. There was no time. I couldn't open it. The ring hissed, got hot in my hands. I didn't understand what was wrong with it. I looked at Eddie. Laurel walked away from the door in some kind of surprise. The boy was knocking on the door and shouting, hoping that they would be heard. Then the boy remembered his father's words. If the problem is not solved, then hands are used. He picked up the disc and carried it to the door. Eddie raised this disc over his head and hit the door with all his might, shouting for it to break and open. Tears streamed from the eyes of the little boy, who tried so hard to save his friend that he was very sorry. He turned around with tears, told the girl what had happened, smiled through his tears. He had succeeded. The boy ran out and shouted with a smile to Laurel that they would see each other again, but now he was in a hurry and did not want to slow down. The little heroine wanted to run too, asked to wait for her, but the movement became slow. When Edgar ran into the hall, shouting about the poisoned drink, everyone heard his speech and froze in anticipation. The Viscount's face darkened. He realized that if the harm was revealed to anyone, his entire family would be executed. This cannot be allowed. Jin looked at his father, noticed how his hand reached into his inner pocket, called, but the man did not notice, immersed in his thoughts. He took out a bottle. If he drinks the poison, then everything will work out. If only he himself can correct the situation first. Without hesitation, he brought the glass with the drink and droplets of poison to his mouth and wished his son to continue the dynasty of kings. And while the king was finding out the truth from Viscount Porteous, he, of course, made a surprise face. He would never have dared. The boy knew that this was not the man's idea. The criminal was different, shouting to attract attention. But before he had time to point out the traitor, in the middle of the hall there was a knock and the cry of a child calling for his dad. The poison was the same in both the king's glass and the Archduke's, Kane explained, breaking out of his memories. The man raised his head. The father knew that the Viscount was involved in this, involved in the conspiracy, but he was dead and answering to someone else. The king resolved the matter by executing Viscount Porteous and his entire family, a bloody day with great reluctance. Bell folded his arms and argued with the guy that Ignis survived, and the children continued the work of their parents. The uprising must begin no matter what. The knights listened carefully and understood that this was required. Bell didn't know that Laurel was there. He gave in to her, trying to find out the details. The girl didn't talk about this situation. She turned around and was touched by the fact that Edgar was small but so courageous. Where did that come from in him? Bell didn't know anything yet, so he exclaimed joyfully and embarrassedly that the captain had someone. The news about the chosen one shocked him. He rushed to congratulate and shake the man's hand, and immediately bombarded him with questions. Everyone laughed. The prince and captain knew the truth. Belle smiled incomprehensibly, and Laurel lowered her head, her cheeks turning red. Kane turned to the boy, shook his finger, and confirmed that the rumors were true about the fact that Edgar liked his sister. Continuing to laugh, the prince confirmed, spreading his arms, and there was silence in the room. Bell jumped up, moving his finger from his sister to the captain and back. Kane chuckled into his fist. Apparently the girl did not share. The boy continued to be surprised, shouted, and did not understand how the Duke and the Marquise could be together. He raised his finger up, remembered the words of his sister when she spoke about her hatred of the captain, was embarrassed, and tried to justify herself. The young man was completely confused, sat down, and tears flowed. The prince tried to calm him down, clarified what was wrong, and was interested in the reason for such a reaction. I continued to find out from him. I didn't expect that everything would turn out so quickly. But when I found out that the wedding had not yet come, Belle became more furious. The young man was more interested in what would happen to the statuses. If they got married, then someone would have to give up theirs. Laurel's family has been through a lot. The girl had to face opposition, but Sir Edgar cannot give up his own. Belle lamented, "He is a magician. He will not have heirs. What to do then?" The prince looked carefully and even with some sympathy. He put his hand to his chest. The man resolutely replied that he would do this. He would renounce his status. Cain jumped up, looked frightened from his friend to the magician, waved his hands. There was no need to make hasty statements. Belle was already screaming from the good news, loudly shouting excitedly and thanking the guy. I stared dumbfounded at how they shook hands and agreed to address each other. The heroine promised to return to this conversation, because there was also the guy's mother. There was a knock on the door and a man came in. We received a letter from Anna, notifying everyone present that she was expecting a visit, including Laurel, who screamed at the news. That's right, everyone heard correctly. She looked at Eddie in fear, and he looked at her. They had no idea what their mother knew. All her children and girlfriend gathered at Anna's table, had a meal, and everyone felt awkward. The mistress of the house was the first to break the silence, asking the heroine a question about food. She was just drinking and almost choked. She blushed, laughed, she liked everything, but wanted to know the reason why she was invited to dinner today. Without being cunning, Mother asked directly about their relationship. The character darkened, the guy coughed and turned away. Anna repeated her question. Laurel began to stutter, did not know what to say. Then Edgar suggested discussing this in private. Noticing the reaction, I realized that I was right, put my fork and knife on the table, and would go straight to the point. Discontent was in the air. The children were old enough, which means they won't play. It's a wedding right away. The woman began her speech, raised her eyes, the same blue eyes as her son's. Edgar's brother intervened. It was too early to decide. He waved his hands when the guy interrupted him. He would renounce the title. His face darkened. She sharply raised her head. Mother asked again. Because she did not understand what she heard, she frowned. The man tried to explain that Laurel was the only heir. The boy screamed indignantly and looked at his brother. The young man calmly continued to say that the girl would not change her status, but he could, especially since Lloyd was already an adult and could accept the role of the Duke. The heroine shook her head, touched Eddie with her hand, turned to her mother, that nothing had been discussed yet, and tried to smooth out the situation. Anna looked straight at her son, asked only one question, whether he was sure of his decision, and waited for an answer. Laurel darkened and lowered her head. Edgar was determined. Mum was waiting for an answer. He spoke seriously, confirmed his words. Silence reigned at the table. Anna's face darkened, and her brother was confused by the upcoming status. Mother closed her eyes, exhaled, and said that this was good news and unexpected recognition. They raised their heads at her, shocked by such a statement. They did not understand why there was no scandal. Eddie gave in to his mother. He was interested in this reaction. She didn't want to ask anything else. The woman sighed again. She didn't see any point in it. Anna said wearily. She understood everything. She had probably been thinking about this for more than one day, and closed her eyes. She turned to Laurel, smiled. She liked her, laughed, and felt warm feelings for her future daughter-in-law. Mother asked me to address the girl on a first-name basis. She exclaimed that she agreed and hastily nodded her head. Anna said that when the girl was born, they were able to see the angel, she admitted. But being a girl, she didn't like either dresses or dolls. Despite this, Laurel was afraid to step on any bug and always smiled sweetly. The women laughed and wished for a long time that she would become her daughter-in-law, but the Marquise decided to let her find love herself. The Duchess put the bracelet that her mother-in-law had given her on the girl's arm, waited for the moment to give it to her daughter-in-law, and tears began to appear. Laurel bowed her head towards Anna. Tears flowed down her cheeks. Such a woman laughed. It was pleasant for her. The rest of the evening passed calmly. The girl bent down to say goodbye to her household, and everyone came out to see her off. Edgar kissed her hand, wished her a good journey. The heroine was embarrassed. They would see each other again, she was sure of it. After closing the doors, the guy thanked his leaving mother, but he was confused by one detail which he asked about. Aina turned to her son. She spoke sincerely then, but one thing still bothered her. The man clasped his hands, preparing to answer the strangest questions. She remembered the incident. The sins of their family would not go away. She wanted to separate them at first, but it didn't work. She bowed her head and closed her eyes. Mother continued, she will take care of Leah in order to outweigh the cup of sins. Then when her time comes, so that she will not be ashamed in front of the Marquise and the Marquis. They must do everything for the happiness of this girl. He takes care of her. Eddie must promise this. While they were talking about the heroine, she admired the ring. Suddenly, a man blocked the path of the carriage in which Laurel was riding, and the horses braked sharply. A girl jumped out, rubbing the top of her head, hit herself inside when the horses suddenly stopped, and looked with one eye at the standing figure. Next himself met the captain. His eyes widened in fear. Standing opposite each other, there were no words. He pressed his hand to his chest. Edgar will try his best to make Laurel happy. He promises that. Next was purposefully heading towards the girl. Muttering along the way that it wasn't them, she warned her not to approach. She was already taking out her sword. The boy came closer to her, admitted that they were ordered. They obeyed. She didn't know what to do. Her hand was still on the hilt of the sword. The heroine did not at all expect that Next would fall on her knees in front of her. She was confused, bent over, but immediately straightened up. He looked up at the character, begged for mercy, raised his hands. There were tears in his eyes, an unhappy young man who had lost everything. He folded his hands, repented that Ignis had abandoned him, told everything without holding back, tears flowing down his cheeks. He grabbed Laurel by the leg, didn't know what he could do. There was no life without his girlfriend. He needed help and hoped to get it. He made a discovery that if Next killed her, Ignis would take the man back, grabbed her by the hands, still remaining on the ground, and begged. Laurel narrowed her eyes, listened to the guy's outpourings. A lot became clear to her. She was especially interested in the fact that the sorceress was being used. The boy's hands trembled. He was mad and his speech was no better. He showed Ignis in the best light, an orphan. It was hard. Having listened to a lot, but not taking it close, she swung her sword and blood splashed out to the sides, wounding Next. Anger took possession of Laurel, grabbed the man by the cloak, shook him, and was touched by the words about her parents and comparison with the witch. Continuing to shake the young man, through clenched teeth she reprimanded him for his family. There would be no mercy. A white glow spread. The heroine turned around, would gladly stick a sword into him, fights with herself, will not do this. She left the man lying on the pavement, climbed into the carriage herself. Too much has changed with death. The girl calmed Edgar. He covered his face with his hand and asked her for forgiveness, waved his hands and laughed. He grabbed the heroine's hands, squeezed them, closed his eyes. He shouldn't have let go of one. He knew about this possible option. He pressed her close, promised to see her beloved off every day, and tried to argue. A letter from another Laurel distracted her from the pleasant words. There was a box on her lap. She opened it and saw the message. The girl said, reading the letter, that she was interested in the dish that Eddie loves, because she eats everything cooked with great appetite. Laurel began to ask, laughing. The peaceful life of the family was at stake. The man thought, chuckled. Eddie joked, Leah laughed, darkened at his own joke, apologized, and said something stupid. The guy became curious about how they got married. The girl told how it all happened, about courtship and parental approval. The heroine's cheeks turned red. She pressed herself close to the young man and considered the man very sweet and caring. I couldn't resist the temptation and gave a kiss to the girl. Her eyes widened, her cheeks turned red. She accepted the kiss and returned it. She pushed her away, bowed her head. Her cheeks became even redder when she timidly asked the young man at what moment he fell in love with her. He admitted that at first he didn't pay attention to the heroine, since they already knew each other, but when the two of them were investigating the case, something caught his attention. After that incident, he could no longer take his eyes off the girl, and when she came to reprimand him, he fell head over heels in love. Edgar thought, if that Leah is not a knight, then how he fell in love with her, raised his hand to his chin, because his love arose during the investigation. This question was curious. Laurel was eager to ask her, looked at her with a smile, and would wait for an answer. He clasped his hands in his lap. It was awkward to ask, but he also wanted to know about the character's feelings. When he appeared, she laughed. I'm sure she wouldn't want to know. I thought that he would tell me now, but the girl stuck out her finger and laughed very loudly and said that it was a secret. So time passed. Happiness seemed so long. They clung to each other, joked. Laughter flowed throughout the room. Laurel wrote a letter to herself, telling her when and how her Eddie fell in love with her, fascinated by how she behaved with the knights. Now it became clear why the captain was not interested in other girls. She put the letters in the box. There was also a question about falling in love between another couple. After a shower, I was going into my room, drying my hair with a towel, when a letter arrived. A sound was heard. She pulled out the towel and began to read without removing it. As she read, her eyes grew larger. Sweat streamed down her face, left the towel and her hair alone, grabbed the letter with both hands. This happened 15 years ago at Kane's coronation. She reminded me of that incident. Then she ran in and knocked a glass of drink and poison out of the prince's hands. The girl did not expect this from herself at all. Laurel leaned her hands on the table, the letter lying next to her, because she didn't have such a thing, analyzing her actions and that other one. Then she didn't follow Edgar. She acted differently, completely differently. The girl ran into the hall, but she didn't do it. In the garden at the table, the prince and princess enjoyed each other's company. Kane fed his beloved. They laughed loudly and contagiously. And while they were absorbed in their love, Edgar was present at the same table, his face darkening. He was offered to try dessert. The captain waved it away, turned away, citing a sore stomach. No one forced him. They congratulated them on starting to date Laurel. Kane and Michelle had a smile all over their faces. They were embarrassed. His Highness already knew everything about Ignis and about the salon, even about the quarrel, Eddie confirmed, lowering his eyes. He was still not very pleased to remember the day when he let Laurel go alone. The young man's face darkened. He became interested in how the prince found out about the quarrel. Stared at him, he began to sweat and became confused. Edgar jumped up, got angry. The club led by the prince was still operating, and he asked to stop it. Kane tried to justify himself. Michelle spoke up. It was her idea. The smiling girl came up with a new club and a new goal. He closed his eyes doomedly, scratched the back of his head. Even the princess is involved in this matter. The scale is already large. He removed his hand, looked at them directly. A blush appeared on his cheeks. He wants to marry Laurel, of course. His face darkened, his eyes lowered, his smile stopped shining. The decision about marriage is made by more than one person, and the problem between the girl's parents and his father has not gone away, he confessed to his friends. Kane noticed his friend's concern, gave in to him. The captain folded his arms on his chest and looked away in indecision. He wants to ask, he doesn't know how. He told about the secret. Michelle and the prince were scared. They immediately thought about an affair, but the guy assured that it was not so. He turned everything around as if it was not about him, but about his friend, who couldn't decide to tell the truth to his beloved. Just recently, a friend realized that he wants the girl to smile, and if she hides a secret, then one day she will come out, and if she tells her, she will cry. He clenched his hand into a fist and poured out his fears, hiding behind his friend, who would be tormented by this. Kane thought, gave in to him. Only a friend can make a decision, but he wouldn't tell him, because the truth is a rather complicated thing. While the prince gave reasons why he would not tell, Michelle replied that this was not right and she did not agree. She understands the prince, all his words, but it is better to let the girl overcome this. There was something right and true in her words. Kane warned that he might be offended, but Michelle supported the captain. Everything would work out for him. Edgar waved his hands, not he, but his friend in this story tried to convince his friends. A servant ran towards them, shouting loudly about the incident. The guy pressed himself to his knees, tried to catch his breath, fearfully informed Gina and Laurel about the Archduke. After his visit, the girl was in tears. Hearing this, Edgar turned around sharply. Fear appeared on his face. His face became pale. About an hour earlier, the captain was sitting in the library with a man. He was leaning on his cane and was being too kind to her. He put his hand to his chest, closed his eyes, and began to talk about the incident with the carriage, and he knew who was behind it. And this is a person close to her. As soon as she heard this, the girl's face darkened. Her eyes widened and her mouth parted. Jin laughed and shook his head. He should apologize for visiting so early. But Laurel didn't want to listen to the apology. She was only interested in one thing, the reason, and eagerly waited for an answer. He leaned over to the cup of tea and feignedly replied that he had been thinking for a long time. Whether to tell the truth, the captain became interested. He raised the cup to his lips, looked straight at the girl, and told a story. It would be about the past marquise and her death. Laurel couldn't stand it any longer, pushed to the point, didn't want to listen to the rest, bowed playfully, the man would answer directly. She screamed when the speech touched the prince and her lover. She did not understand how they were connected. Jin calmly continued his speech. The girl heard that she had fallen in love with the son of her enemy. Her eyes widened, her lower lip trembled. He revealed the terrible truth that the culprit of the incident, Duke Edgar's father, could not keep it a secret because the girl did not know it. That day, Laurel's parents wanted to meet the only person they trusted unconditionally, Anna, Eddie's mother. The previous duke found out about the meeting and ordered Nex to replace the horse with a chimera, thereby setting up an accident. The young man stood up. The Marquise had no idea about the assassination attempt because she was going to see a loved one. Laurel clutched her knee tightly. She was shaking. She didn't understand because the Duke had no reason for the death of her parents. The man was already close, looked down, grinned, his blue eyes filled with coldness. At that moment, he was already on his side. The click of Jin's heels was heard in the silence as he left, but continued to talk about the conspiracy and raising the status of the past Duke. Lady Anna found out about her husband's betrayal, persuaded him to renounce his title and took him to the outback. His hand trembled and clenched the fabric, and finally he said that he was not to blame for the death, he just wanted to lure him to himself. Jane found himself next to Laurel. The girl sat gloomier than a cloud, lowered her head and simply listened to everything he told her. He leaned towards the captain's ear and suggested that Edgar might know everything. The whisper gave off a headache. Laurel surprised the Archduke, stood up, was confident in the young man. Not like that, she stated decisively. She thanked her for the story, walked away to the door, and already touched the door handle with a trembling hand. She herself would ask the captain. She opened the door, held it, turned to the man and asked his lordship to leave. The Archduke left with a loud sigh, mocking the knight, assenting and pushing him to ask personally. After he left, she sank down holding the door, covered her face with her hand, scared the guards near the door. The guy rushed to her, trying to find out what was wrong with her. She ignored the soldiers' worries and loudly slammed the door to the room, thereby causing surprise. Approaching the table, she quickly began to write something on a piece of paper. Did not raise her head, she was in a hurry. With a trembling hand, she put the message into the box. A tear fell on her hand and the box clinked. The answer was not long in coming. She raised her head. There were large tears in her eyes. Her mouth was wide open. Now a lot would be decided. She was in a hurry. Her hands were shaking. She screamed and the box flew down from the table. Laurel cursed, frightening her fighters with such a reaction. She fell to her knees. Everything was the other way around. It said that, on the contrary, thanks to Edgar, the parents were able to survive. The heroine trained in the gym, released all her anger. This helped not only calm down, but also think. I received a letter in which Leah says that out of curiosity she asked her parents, although her father hesitated, but in the end he told her. The beloved just saved him. They were already getting into the carriage when the excited Edgar appeared and announced the replacement of the horse. Then the chimera rebelled. They were able to repel the attack together, after which the guy told the whole truth. His father notified the Archduke about the meeting, and he already ordered the murder of Laurel's family. Since he knew about Edgar's feelings for her, he could not just sit there. He prevented the death of his loved ones. The message helped them stay alive. I got carried away with the training, so when I heard a sound from the side, I made my lunge and the tip of the sword rested on the captain's throat. The other one, who did not want this truth to become a heavy burden for her, offered the man sparring, and the girl began to attack the guy. The blades met. A ringing sound was heard, and she directed all her anger and resentment at him. Although the Marquise understood that the young man's father was not the initiator, she still tormented her. It tormented her very much, striking blow after blow. The girl had a lot of different thoughts in her head, weighed everything, analyzed it, and at the same time actively worked with the sword, so that she threw the man away. The sparring went well. She ran up to Edgar, worried about him, calmed him down, and assured him that everything was fine, but held a broken stick in his hands. I didn't understand what was happening to the girl. I knew and told about the Archduke. I went to look for her, looked in surprise, and waited for an explanation. She closed her eyes, gathered her strength, and in the end decided to share what was tormenting the girl. She asked for forgiveness. She knew that it was difficult to start that investigation, and it was all done only for her sake. She also asked for forgiveness for her reaction. But with all this, she raised her eyes and asked without hiding that his father was involved in the assassination attempt on his parents. What Eddie's role was in this, curiosity took over. He exhaled, closed his eyes, tears streamed down his cheeks, everything became clear even without the man's words. He was very sorry. He found out only recently, did not hide it from the girl. She hunched over and stared at the guy in confusion. He fell to his knees without removing his hand from his face, sharing his fears and worries that he would leave him. Continuing to talk and express, he noticed that the heroine stood up and turned away from him. The pain in her eyes lit up and stretched out his hands to her. Laurel listened to him, said a lot of things, but only said that all this could not bring her parents back and did not turn around. She continued in the same way, without turning around, that she shouldn't see each other anymore. They were breaking up right now. She closed her eyes and began to leave, breaking everything that was between them. Edgar was in pain, jumped up, extended his hands, and shouted the girl's name, all the hopelessness and despair in this name. He ran up, put his hand on his shoulder, prayed that his beloved could listen, asked in a whisper. She turned her face, tears rolled down her cheeks, unstoppable, and the look she cast at the guy was insane. She turned around, leaving the man behind her, and continued moving. Although he asked not to leave, but he understood that he would never return. He fell to his knees, covered his face with his hands. No matter how he asked, no matter how he begged the heroine, she silently left, leaving everything that was between them behind. Ignis listened carefully to the crow, and a light smile appeared on her lips from what the animal told. Leaning on the railing, she was very pleased that the girl was on the edge. The man did not turn around, but squinted his eyes. Archduke Jin chuckled, closed his eyes, and leaned on the handle of his cane, hoping that he could not stand the nobility and truth. He slightly embellished the version that Laurel presented, told about the meeting of the Marquise and what happened next. Everyone present in the hall was pleased with this event. Ignis sat down on a chair, remembering that moment. Grinning, they were in such a hurry to get to the Duchess that they forgot about their safety. The discussion touched upon both Edgar and his mother. The boy's father lost heart and ran away, and Anna betrayed her friends and saved her husband. Jean twisted the truth. The Duchess in his version knew everything from the very beginning. An evil grin touched her lips. I turned to Ignis and asked about next. This question took me by surprise, but she continued to examine her fingernails. I remembered her words. The uprising is very soon, but the girl waved it off and didn't know what was wrong with him. He rudely interrupted the attempt to justify himself, reminded how their fathers died. The words rang in the room. There was no hiding or hiding from them. The man stood up and now towered over the girl. They swore that they would overthrow this weak-minded prince. Jin sealed. The young man was already leaving when Ignis admitted that next would return, stopped and nodded. She snapped her fingers and sparkled with fire. He couldn't live without her. The villain was sure of that. Next was sitting under an old canopy. His lowered head indicated his thoughts. The girl appeared unexpectedly, and the guy had not yet seen her. Noticing her, he ran screaming, but miscalculated and tripped over a stone. Stretched out on the path, the witch did not speak. He bowed his head, begged to forgive him, remaining in a bent position. He persuaded and poured out his soul how hard it was for him without his beloved. He will no longer become a hindrance. The girl's hands gently lifted the guy's face. It was drenched in tears. She carefully examined his face, noticed the wound. The young man was embarrassed. The tears kept flowing, but they became a little less. She promised to teach a lesson. She fell to her knees, embraced her, and so they cried about their love, thanking Ignis for returning to her. Bell stood near the door and hesitantly raised his hand to knock, doubting how best to proceed. He was worried about his sister, and finally he decisively called Leah, but the girl was sitting with a glass of water and turned to her brother. She turned back, nodded, everything was fine. She didn't talk. She got away with a dry answer. The young man was confused. The girl's younger brother sat down next to him. He listened to the story of how the parents died and who was involved, nodded, everything was clear to him. He said sadly, he didn't even suspect it. The girl smiled. Now they need to think about something else. Laurel reminded her of the uprising ahead. The young magician trembled, lowered his head, and tears rolled down. He didn't understand how hard it was, because Eddie was the only one she could rely on. They did an excellent job when it was necessary, but now if it hurts, let the pain come out, her brother said. And tears flowed down the girl's cheeks. There is no need to hold back anymore. In fact, it is very bitter to realize the separation. The brother and sister hugged each other and gave full vent to their emotions. They cried like never before. Even at the funeral of their parents, they tried to hold on. They felt like they were little again. They remembered that they hadn't been to their parents for a long time. They wanted to go. It was decided right now. They missed them very much. They were not at the grave. Belle was holding a large bouquet of flowers in his hands, and Laurel was smiling at him. Now they will visit them more often, but they stopped abruptly and saw Edgar standing with a bouquet near the grave of the captain's parents. He knelt down on one knee in front of the grave, apologized, and was sincerely sorry. The brother and sister stopped, dumbfounded by this. They were silent and waited for what would happen next, listening to the apologies. He lowered his head, exhaled, whispered an apology again. He had no idea what his father had done. The man was bitter. Eddie lamented, saying it was not all his fault, only his father was to blame, and even if he had known, he could have prevented the tragedy. Belle looked, squinted at Laurel, noticed that the girl was silent, and began to move. He opened his mouth when he realized that the girl had gone to the captain, pursed her lips, walked decisively. Her face did not express any emotions. Eddie jumped up, noticed that he was not the only one here, turned to the heroine, and the girl stopped, clenching her hands in rage. She stood opposite him, hissed with rage, told the guy, looked at Laurel in surprise, didn't expect to be here. The brother tried to stop and say something to his sister, but the determination in his gaze and silence indicated that she did not like this whole situation, and the young man's arguments were not heard. He admitted his mistake, behaved recklessly. It was not worth coming to this place to ease his soul. The captain agreed with him. There was no point in coming. She walked past, brushing her shoulder against the man, said goodbye to him again, hoping not to see each other even purely by chance. He screamed when he heard that a man should take care of himself. He shouted the same thing to her, that's all. People who were once close to each other passed by. Edgar was leaving. He had already passed by Belle. His little brother tried to call Laurel. The situation was very unpleasant for everyone present here. Belle was confused. He thought it was too rude to him. He didn't understand what was happening because there was such love between these two. But the heroine did not listen. She heard, but did not comment, interrupted the young man and asked to say hello to his parents. He came up and finally told his sister. He didn't understand why they had a quarrel and asked her a question about love. Tears flowed down her cheeks. She admitted that she loved her, interrupted herself, answered that she loved her. Her confession came as a complete surprise. Belle blushed, lowered his eyes to the flowers. But what happened was that he heard his sister's voice. The blame for the death of his parents lay with her. Captain Edgar, the son of the man who was responsible for the death of his parents, screamed, throwing out all his resentment and pain. These people should not be happy. She fell in front of the grave. Her chest hurt. They all must suffer the same way their family suffered. The brother listened, but could not remain silent. Then she doomed herself to misfortune, he thought. Touched the flowers. Tears flowed down her cheeks. I couldn't say that I knew my parents better than my sister, but I was sure that they didn't want the girl to choose revenge, but her happiness. In fact, it was no one's fault, and Laurel and Eddie became victims. If you analyze the situation, the captain tried to do everything to make her happy. He stood next to the girl, showed hope that she might suddenly change her mind, but she leaned towards the flowers and quietly whispered that she would never be able to forgive. She threw away the bouquet of flowers that Eddie had brought from the grave, stood up and the wind ruffled her hair, and decided not to love this man anymore. The guys gathered in the hall. One of them was sneezing and snot flowing. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to warm up. It was a little cool. The atmosphere between the nights was as cool as a northern cyclone. They discussed the seating chart and the list for the upcoming ceremony. Edgar raised his head. He began to notice that the guys were up to something. He narrowed his eyes, having a bad feeling. The delighted boys turned to Laurel. They wanted to offer something, discuss something. They had a lot of persistence. They had a proposal for both the 1st and 2nd battalions to organize joint training, and they were pleased with themselves. She closed her eyes and lowered her head. They already had training planned for next week. Seeing their readiness, the girl can lead her. The guys grabbed each other, looked at the captain in fear. A special activity right now, especially for them. She stood up and clasped her hands. A flame blazed behind the girl. The training was successful. The defeated guys collapsed on the ground. Their strength left them. The color drained from their faces. They didn't understand why this was happening to them. They were exposed. They could die. This training was very intense. Laurel paid attention to the smell. It smelled like very tasty cakes. She picked it up and began to examine the chocolate cake, wondering who forgot. She got up and saw that a path was lined with such cakes. The heroine was surprised at this, but tried to understand. Edgar sniffed, felt that he smelled something sweet, closed his eyes, enjoyed it. The boy tried to assure him that everything was imagining everything to him. Such a smell could seduce, he showed his finger. They noticed that Laurel was already trying this cake. She looked at them angrily. The cakes did not help. The guys howled, turned to the deacon, asked to share wisdom. They had to eat these cakes themselves. The man suggested that when they are alone, they communicate and spend time together. Then reconciliation occurs. Some were indignant because they were minors. The young people were thinking about a 3rd operation, and now Laurel is already listening to how to make the trip comfortable. With her mouth open, the captain stared at the carriage, which was decorated in pink and had horses tied with a ribbon. Without turning to them, the girl answered directly. She knew what these guys were trying to achieve. While they happily sent off the carriage, which they thought they would like, they didn't guess one thing. I just didn't understand why they needed all this. The memories were transferred to the moment when they were riding in a cramped cabin with Eddie. The guy whispered. They were only starting to make the captain angry. They knew what he would ask when discussing the plan, it came to mind. Then one of the soldiers admitted that the girl understood everything correctly. They wanted to organize a meeting with the captain of the 1st battalion. Ape began to tell Laurel that even such bunglers as they were able to notice the withdrawal of the characters. What to say about the rest? His friend tried to stop him, but it was too late. They noticed the exhausted appearance of the knight. They offered to try to talk with Edgar. They wanted the best. The more the girl listened to the man's speech, the lower her head sank. It was clear that she missed the captain very much. She asked them to come back, then touched the carriage door, smiled and thanked them for their concern. The faces of the young men changed. They were able to cope with this, and were now very pleased with themselves. She smiled after all. Her boys were so cute. The carriage took them away. The girl thought that they were right, and she needed to talk to the captain. In this carriage, the heroine lowered her head, wondering where to start her conversation. She had a lot of questions and wanted to ask everything. She touched the glass with her palm. First, you need to sort out all the misunderstandings. Then you can think about whether to forgive. You can't forgive a man. I didn't know what to do. I despised myself for it. The carriage stopped. The door opened. The surprise on the guy's face was not feigned. And while the girl was tormented by thoughts about love or not, the young man climbed into the carriage, his eyes betraying sadness. The captain looked at the girl in the carriage in surprise when she asked a question about time. How long had she known about her father? She didn't look up and said that when her father found out about their relationship, he wrote a letter to his mother. Eddie didn't dare get inside. The guy tried to explain that there was no deception. She didn't look at him anyway. She replied that Archduke Jin said everything. Edgar heard the version with his mother and father, screamed when his father refused the title, referred to his poor health, and his family believed him. I gave in to the girl. All the words were sincere. There were no lies then. Resentment and pain rang in my voice, which still made me look at the man. He raised his head, exhaled sharply. His eyes turned into small buttons as soon as he heard about the trial and his father. He lowered his head, bowed in front of Laurel, turned away as she thought, the expected result. She closed the carriage door. There was a request. She talked about it, so that the captain would stay away from her, she reminded her. She is so tired. She understands and knows perfectly well that she must keep her distance. But she can't. She listened with her head raised, her face turning pale. She asked me to help her with this. When they arrived and began to descend, they heard a call. Someone was calling them. Kane's servant came running to them, barely caught his breath. They urgently needed to bring these two into the office. They learned that there would be no uprising at the prince's coronation. The couple was surprised. In His Majesty's office, they sat down on soft chairs, were impatient to find out the reasons, and hurriedly asked about the uprising. They began to offer options from whom they could find out. Laurel would ask another from herself, Eddie from an ally at the holiday. And so they acted harmoniously and deftly together, that Kane looked up from his papers and opened his mouth at this. The man interrupted them. He would have liked to, attracted attention to himself, continue preparations for this uprising, completely confuse the knights. He clasped his hands, put his chin on his hands. If they believe in this and the uprising happens, too many people will die. Therefore, we need to act strictly according to plan and keep the rest secret, and that's what we decided on. There are 2 days left before the birthday. They are guided by the information they receive from another world and are preparing for anything. The Archduke will be with the red-haired girl, and the attack will happen after the first dance, the other Leah told all this. As planned, Laurel and Edgar will be in the center of the hall, dancing and guarding His Majesty, the captain clearly informed. He clasped his hands, clapped. Kane's face lit up when he heard the plan, praised the two. He was happy with everything and liked everything. The man nevertheless expressed doubts about their dance. Asked to try to dance, Eddie tried to deny it, but the girl easily agreed. She stood up and extended her hand to him. They shouldn't arouse suspicion, so it's worth practicing. If she wants it, they can try it, he agreed and extended his hand, touching each other. We went out into the street and couldn't find a better place, but the heroine assured us that she would come over and it was worth trying without music to get into the beat. Edgar blushed, leaned over, extended his hand, asking her to dance. Laurel was waiting for this. She wrapped her arms around the man's shoulders, met their eyes, memories enveloped them. Moving in a dance, everything that was good between them was remembered. Although she tried to keep her distance from the young man, it happened under the pretext of dancing. She pushed him away, turned away. It hurt too much. Let him take care of himself. Laurel left sadly, with melancholy frozen in her eyes. The captain looked after her with the same melancholy. 2 days later, the maids helped the girl get dressed, straightened and tidied up, and tightened up something. Edgar was also getting ready, buttoning up his doublet. His mother came, handed him a sword, and looked back at her. The doors opened, the marquise entered the hall, she was announced. Everyone raised their heads in greeting. The soldier could not stand it and asked Edgar to come down because the captain had already been announced, rolled his eyes, did not like that he was sticking his nose into everything, and took a glass of champagne from the tray. The guy tried to find her among everyone, turned around, couldn't find her. Then Eddie got indignant, she was right in front of them. I couldn't stand it, and shouted that the most beautiful girl in the hall was Laurel. The heroine heard this, but did not look for the source of the scream. But she turned her face, clenched her teeth, began to get angry. This was not the most appropriate time for jokes. They announced next to meet Archduke Jin and the beautiful daughter of Baron Emma, a red-haired girl hiding behind a fan. Making his way through the crowd, the character felt like déjà vu. Everything was repeating itself. It seemed familiar. Suddenly, he brought out a glass of wine from his thoughts, which ended up on Laurel's dress. She was doused with it, and now they were apologizing. The girl stained her dress. The heroine watched with wide eyes, but feignedly reassured her that she had magic tricks to remove the stain. She asked if I could borrow it for her to clean. Laurel lowered her head, trying to figure it out. The dress on the girl also seemed familiar. Edgar came to the rescue. He brought a napkin. He wouldn't have time because he couldn't wait for the first dance. She mentally thanked the guy. A man led me away, asking how I was doing, rubbing a red spot on my chest and frowning. The king began his speech, raised his glass. The prince and princess stood behind him, thanking His Majesty for the arrival of the guests. The king raised the wine glass high. The Council of 12 will open this holiday with a dance. Eat, drink, and be merry, said loudly. Laurel and Edgar began to dance. The dress hugged the girl's chiseled figure, and the couple looked very harmonious. They imperceptibly squinted their eyes, shared their observations with the guy that it was with Archduke Ignis. He agreed and slightly raised his eyes. He brought his face closer to the heroine, whispered barely audibly that he was taking upon himself the protection of the prince after the dance, and asked her not to take her eyes off those two. The dance ended, the gentlemen bowed, saying goodbye to their ladies and asked Leah to be careful. Laurel felt magical power, so she instantly transformed, took out a sword from her things, and the people nearby screamed in fear. She looked around the hall and suddenly realized that she had been scammed, especially when she noticed that the lady with the Archduke was smirking contentedly. Someone else used the spell. The girl next to her was not Ignis. She stood in the form of an old maid on the balcony. Throwing a fireball and flying to the floor with it, she burst out laughing and called them stupid. Edgar appeared right in front of His Majesty, trying to protect him, and ordered him to leave, which is what Kane did along with Michelle. The captain had no weapons, his soldiers shouted to him, and the Marquise flew across the entire hall to their aid. Before she even had time to think, to realize, the body itself began to act, covered Eddie with itself. The man screamed. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes. She would rather die herself than let this man die. She clenched her teeth. She bowed her head, lowered her sword, it's worth admitting. But it happened. She fell in love with her enemy. But Edgar could not allow his Leah to die. He put his hands behind his back and plunged into this red haze, looking at the girl and smiling at her. The young man tried to get an answer from the girl, asked when she started liking him. He wanted to know. She closed her eyes and philosophically noted that sometimes love comes with a person into life. She took his hands in hers and explained that with every workout, with every meal, he came into her life more and more. It took a long time before the girl realized that this was love, leaned over and kissed his hands. She raised her embarrassed face, heat scorched her cheeks, but now she is sure that she loves a man. They laughed and joked, becoming serious. The girl asked if Laurel died during the uprising. What would he do? She became curious. She started saying that she would need to move on with her life and meet someone. Eddie interrupted, assuring her that everything would be fine with her. He looked straight. He would protect her, he promised, even if necessary. At the cost of his own life, the young man's eyes did not lie. And now it just happened. He couldn't live without her. The girl tried to hold him back, stretched out her hands to him, but it was too late. The heroine turned pale. She became scared. People were screaming around her, and she couldn't believe that Eddie had saved her. Magic fireballs were flying at Laurel. She raised her hands, warning her, shouting to beware. The captain defended the royal couple. The prince screamed. Michelle was on the floor, did not turn around, asked the guy if he was okay. Everything was fine with them, they assured her as they stood up, but Eddie, they were worried about the man. She lowered her head, darkened her face. The character was holding back tears. Red grooves appeared under her eyes. She would cry later. Now she couldn't let the tears fall. The safety of His Majesty is important. The captain would agree with her, so they prepared to defend Kane. Her battalion lined up behind. It is necessary to hold out until reinforcements arrive. The Archduke grinned, looking directly at this defense. The prince was glad that his father was not here. He peered into the faces. Otherwise, the old king would not have survived so many traitors to the nobles. Lord Ordo, the guy's friend and assistant, held the princess's hand and entrusted Kane to take her to a safe place in the garden, to her father. The man was indignant that the prince also needed to be saved, turned around, shouted that he would stay. It was time to win and help. Edgar dropped out. They began to argue about what would remain. He wanted to help. The prince did not give in to him. Then Michelle intervened. They had better leave. She begged. The Lord looked back at her. Thereby they will help Kane. He will not worry about his beloved. He pointed out where they needed to go. The girl asked to survive. The man took her away, but she constantly looked back. Kane was determined, held the sword. This was his battle too, so he stayed here to help. The soldiers rushed to the attack, shouting and holding their swords ready. This was their battle. They must stand up for the honor of the prince. The warriors shielded Laurel, asked to deal with the magician, and then they themselves, the sorceress, stood on the balcony. She threw magic balls. The blade of Prince Kane and Archduke Jin collided, clenched their teeth, fought back. No one wanted to give in. He could not contain his emotions. The man screamed and swore that he could not allow such a mediocrity to be at the head of the empire. The nodules on his face began to move with anger. The sword whistled, and a wound formed on Jin's face. Blood and sweat flew to the side. He threw his head back. It hurt. Kane was filled with anger. He, in turn, could not allow such a heartless bastard to take his place, it was said. The girls confronted each other. Laurel repelled the fiery attack with her sword. Ignis directed the full power of her power at her. Crazy speeches came from the sorceress. She laughed at the captain, egged him on to praise her because she killed the enemy, not wanting to listen to such a thing. She swung her sword. There was an explosion, and Ignis was thrown back against the wall, lowered her head on her chest, did not try to get up. She no longer had the strength to do so. Walking on thin ice, saying such words, the tip of the sword was pointed at the girl, so that she was pinned to the wall. Laurel towered over her. A creature with 3 heads burst into the room, smashing the wall, smoke emanating from it, sticking out its tongue, spinning, looking for a victim. The captain screamed loudly. At the last moment, she was thinking about her only dear person. If she had known, she would have forgiven earlier. Everything lit up with blue light. She closed her eyes, looked carefully. She was protected by the guy's sword. Opening her mouth, she watched Edgar, who was covered in scratches and wounds, rushed into the attack and apologized to the girl for the delay. The chimera was not alone. They filled the room, the princess was taken away, but creatures blocked her entrance. She became confused and ran in the other direction. Lord Ordo was accompanying Michelle when one of the chimera's heads bit the man's shoulder, screamed loudly. Pain overwhelmed him. The girl ran up to the Lord, touched his shoulder, his body trembled, and a creature approached them. Michelle covered herself with her arms, hugged herself. This is the end. No one will come to her aid. She screamed loudly, tears flowed from her eyes. Suddenly, something fell on the monster. Crashing loudly, the girl staggered back and began to fall onto her back. The old king commanded his warriors. He needed to save the princess. He led the army, repelling the attack of those who dared to attack. The princess's sister arrived on time. Katie helped defeat the chimera, smiled at the girl. They made it on time. The woman persuaded the magic tower to come to the rescue, and the magicians did a good job, repelling the attacks of the monsters. Belle was worried about his sister, asked Michelle how and what. Lowering his head and hiding his tears, he told about Laurel and Eddie. Katie refuted the girl's words about the captain. He is more alive than all the living. Looked to the side and saw a blue glow. Laurel saw Edgar, smiled joyfully. Her face immediately changed. Tears were still standing in the corner of her eyes. The prince got into the conversation, interrupted. He is of course very happy for their reunion, but we need to deal with all this first. Kane looked around those present. The forces were equal. Next on his chimera, Jill and the sorceress. The girl saw the company from the prince's side, laughed. There were more of them, holding a bowl of fire in her hands, but the archduke did not change his mind. They must kill everyone. Laurel announced that she was taking over Ignis, and then she would provide cover, and he, in turn, would take on next. And everyone rushed into battle. The heroine ran screaming and putting her sword forward. The skirt of her dress developed, rushing to the attack. Jin and Kane fought with swords, and immediately shouted, ordered next to attack with the chimera, but Edgar attacked the boy. First you need to fight this young man. Covering himself with a sword, he went to meet the monster. Ignis was distracted by Next, cursed, but then she attracted Laurel's attention. There's no point in getting distracted now, it's inappropriate. While talking, the girls splashed out offensive words at each other. The magic concentrated on their hands, opened their palm, and light poured out. Laurel ran up and struck with such force that a beam of light spread across the entire room, the attack pouring towards Ignis. The girl was thrown back against the wall, fell to the floor, her hair scattered on the floor, and a warning came from above not to do tricks. Blazing in yellow power, Laurel warned that this would be the last time the enemy would be spared. Next cried out the name of his beloved, got distracted, Edgar attacked, a creature shone with blue light. The young man began to fall, thrown from his back. The toothy mouth rushed towards the heroine. The guy shouted not to touch his beloved, but managed to turn towards the chimera. Edgar slid towards her, did not show curiosity, but the girl was already fending off the blow and shouted to him all right. Next was happy about the regeneration of the chimeras, smiled but turned to the girl, saw her rise, which meant she was alive. The captain gave the order, 1 blow is needed, just 1, in a vulnerable spot. Let the girl distract him, and he will deliver it. I noticed a red thing. I need to strike there. Then everything will be decided. Next howled and swore. Laurel had almost defeated the guy, reminded her not to stand in the way, when she heard Ignis flying towards her. Edgar immediately shouted about a vulnerable spot, ordered to hit there, and waited for her to do it. Ignis, who was running towards Laurel, suddenly slowed down. A stone thrown at her stopped the girl and arched her back. Nex stared in surprise at his beloved, watched as blood came out of his mouth, was confused, fear reflected in his eyes. He whispered her name, blood appeared on Laurel, dripped onto her cheek. Without raising her head, she did what was required to protect herself. The crossed swords of Jin and Cain trembled. Was it really necessary to go so far? The prince was indignant. He asked to look around. Here the hall was supposed to be filled with laughter, and he was suffering from the uprising. His Majesty was lamenting. Jin could not contain his emotions. He shouted, "That's why Cain is not suitable for the role of king in this empire." The man was indignant. The Archduke screamed, was terribly angry, raised his sword, and was about to hit Cain. A blush colored his cheeks. These people were not ready to sacrifice themselves. The prince struck. Jin fell, grabbed his ribs. The young man reprimanded him. He shouted at him without mincing words. His greed only leads to senseless deaths. He didn't understand this. Cain squinted his eyes, examined the tragedy, and saw that Nex was sitting next to Ignis, who showed no signs of life. The young man screamed, asked the girl not to leave him. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Some people treat these two as unfortunate magicians who chose love, remembering their first meeting. It was necessary to look at it differently. Ignis's hand touched the boy's cheek. The warmth in his gaze had already faded. Blood flowed from his lips. She called him a fool. His hand weakened. He fell, turned away, and closed his eyes. The loud cry of a wounded animal rang through the hall. It was next morning his beloved, holding her tightly to his chest, swaying with his body. Cain looked menacingly. Now everything was finally over. The man couldn't believe his eyes that it all ended like this. The man waved his sword, shouted. Why was he worse than him? The prince wondered. Did not address anyone in particular. The creature that now occupies the throne is not the case. He opened the mirror and disappeared into it. He simply stepped and ran away from the place. But he suddenly stopped, locked in this mirror. Katie couldn't allow it to end so easily. She held out her hand and kept it locked. He tried to get through, to get out of the mirror. He pounded on the mirror. He would get out and kill everyone. He threw out a promise. Everyone gathered around the mirror where Jin was imprisoned. The prince calmed his anger. It was all over. Laurel looked around, saw Nex sitting next to Ignis, turned to him, sitting alone next to her. A girl walked in the middle of the night, her hand bandaged, writing to that other Leah, telling the events that were happening in this world. She also talked about Michelle, who was more glad that she was safe than that everyone was alive, and now the girl knew her place in the kingdom. She also told about her brother. He has been somewhat gloomy lately. Having enlisted the support of the tower, he promised to make them improved boxes. I looked at my hand. There was a box in it. I managed to keep mine, which I was glad about. As for her personally, Edgar ran towards her, also with a bandaged hand, calling her by name, concern in his eyes. But noticing her gaze on him, he waved his hand. Not that she thought. He didn't hurt himself for her sake. It was a misunderstanding. She didn't look at the guy. Tears streamed down her cheeks because he almost died. Eddie made excuses. He happened to have Bella's trinket. He began to apologize to her, asked her several times about the apology, nodded, agreeing, then she forgives, stared at Laurel in shock. She touched his face. Sure, all the apologies were accepted. Everything in general. She understood one thing, that she loved this man. Hearing the captain's confession, he hugged him tightly, squeezed him almost to a crunch, couldn't believe his happiness. A smile froze on his lips. Anna and Laurel met at the table, closed her eyes. The woman offered a sincere apology. Eddie's father, the former duke, lowered his head. He was ashamed. Tears froze in his eyes. The brother leaned towards the girl, put his palm on her hand, looked into her eyes as if supporting her. No one expected that the captain would accept an apology, because since childhood she had loved this woman as a mother. Some sins cannot be forgiven. The lady is forgiven, but not the duke, who will not ask for the death penalty, and this is where Leah's generosity ended. This time the heroine came to her parents' grave alone, to speak out and ask for forgiveness for everything. She could not save them. She is to blame for the death. Because that other Leah ran out and prevented the death of the prince, this did not happen here. Tears made it difficult to see clearly, but the girl smiled because finally she did not consider herself to blame for the death. Kneeling down on one knee, she chooses to be happy, which is what her parents wanted for their children. She laid flowers on the grave of her mother and father. Now a bright streak awaits her. She has made a decision. Edgar was walking along the corridor when he suddenly heard a strange sound, screams and arguing in his office. The guys listened to how to do it, put their hands to their chins. They tried to remember so that it would be easier later. The enraged captain opened the doors and ran in. He shouted at his subordinates that this was not the first time he asked to stop all this. Laurel stood embarrassed with a bouquet of flowers in her hands, her soldiers arguing tastelessly with her. She lowered her head, a light blush stained her cheeks, tried not to look in the direction of the young man. Her thoughts were not in the right place. Snatching the bouquet from her hands, Eddie came too close, leaned over, agreed to everything, every suggestion she made. The answer was yes. She showed her finger, laughed because she didn't know what the captain would offer him, and looked devotedly into his eyes. Standing with a bouquet, he opened his mouth and saw Leah getting down on one knee in front of him. His beloved had finally made up her mind. The ring in the box sparkled. As soon as I opened it, there was no turning back. The proposal arrived. The guys of the 1st and 2nd battalions were sitting in papers, trying to figure out things, remember everything they needed. Lloyd had only recently taken on the role of Duke, but he had already received a huge number of offers, so he was more busy with dates than status. Katie opened a magic school. The prince and princess volunteered there, helping the kids become stronger and happier. Belle pointed to the Chimera and Nexter and Ignis. According to the law, they should have been tried, or rather Nexter alone. While the guys were dealing with the dead and wounded, they missed the moment when Laurel approached the man and shouted to her. The death penalty awaited him. He wouldn't even have time to bury his beloved. Tears rolled from his eyes. He clenched his teeth and listened to the captain's voice. But the girl admitted that she was too tired. If she decided to run away, she wouldn't be able to catch up. Leah's generosity deserves approval. Next took advantage of the veiled offer and disappeared, not alone, but with the Chimera and Ignis. The raven sat on the hand of a contented young man. A straw hat hung on the back of his head and announced a good day to his love. Under a tall oak tree there was a grave, cleaned with extreme care. Next to a rocking chair, Ignis was buried. The other, Edgar, leaned towards his wife. He saw that he was reading a letter from another Laurel. He showed curiosity. The woman turned to him, covered her belly with special warmth, a baby will be born soon, and smiled. They discussed Brother Bell. He went on an unexpected journey from the magic tower, but also suddenly decided to return. Nana, Belfort's friend, tried to calm the young man's hysteria and urged him to get ready, because he was already an adult. When the young man turned to the girl, their eyes met. There could have been love here, but it was just a search for napkins. These two felt awkward. He tried to pull his hand away, asked to let go. Nana screamed in a whisper that she was not holding him. And happy Laurel and Edgar did not notice any awkward details between the guests at all. They were absorbed in each other. Today the happy girl was a bride. They looked with love in their eyes. Their life will be long and beautiful. Having kissed the heroine, she became his wife under the bright sunshine.